Before the cock crows, morning in a medieval village. The air is cold, not crisp like a winter's walk, but dense, damp, and ever so slightly sour. Before the sky even hints at light, you're awake, if you ever really slept. The thatched roof above you is leaking again. It always leaks. And the straw mattress you share with your family has long since molded into a lumpy nest of bugs and flattened grass. Welcome to the year 1324, somewhere in central England. You're a villain, neither slave nor free. A peasant bound to the land, working under the authority of a local lord. You can't leave the village without permission. You can't marry without paying a fee. You can't own much, but what you can own will likely be taxed in 5 different ways by Sunday. But it's not Sunday, it's Tuesday. And it's chore day. Then again, every day is chore day. Rising with the dirt, your morning begins not with an alarm, but with the insistent needs of livestock. Chickens peck and cluck at the wooden door. A scrawny pig roots at the base of the wattle wall. And somewhere, outside, your children are already squabbling over who gets to use the chamber pot first. It's not worth the argument. The pot is little more than a cracked ceramic jug. And there's nowhere to empty it but a shallow ditch behind the house. The smell is constant, but you hardly notice anymore. There's no running water. If you're lucky, there's a communal well, but it's down the muddy path near the mill, and your neighbor's cow fell in last year. The memory of that foul stench still clings to your nose. So for now, you scoop rainwater from a barrel with a dented cup and rinse your hands over a patch of packed earth. No soap, no towel. The chickens make do with less, and so can you. Breakfast of the bound, your stomach grumbles, but there's little to offer it. The porridge from yesterday has fermented slightly, but it's edible if you close your nose and chew quickly. It's made from barley, the poor man's grain, mixed with whatever scraps of turnip or wild garlic you could find. There's no sugar, no salt. Those are for the gentry. You break off a piece of stale rye bread softened in the mush. The crust is tough enough to chip a tooth. You've already lost 2. Dental care isn't a concept so much as a cause for prayer. The children eat from the same bowl. There are no utensils, just fingers. One child has worms again. You'll need to find more tansy and wormwood before the next holy day. Duties and dues, you work a strip of land called a seashells, part of the open field system that divides your village. Each peasant has narrow, scattered plots to prevent anyone from monopolizing fertile soil. The land isn't yours, of course, it belongs to the manor. You owe the Lord 3 days of work per week on his fields before you can tend to your own. You grab a wooden hoe and make your way past the hayrick. Mud squelches underfoot. There's no such thing as waterproof shoes, just wooden clogs tied with string. Your toes are always wet. Out on the Lord's land, you join others in weeding. The soil is thin, the wheat is stunted, and the sun is lazy. You toil until your back is a question mark. You cannot leave until the reeve, a sort of overseer elected by the village but loyal to the Lord, says the day's work is sufficient. Your hands blister easily, but no one complains. Complaining suggests disloyalty or worse, laziness, a sin nearly equal to theft. When illness visits, it stays you hear that Matilda, the miller's youngest, has taken to her bed. That's how people speak of illness here, as if it were a polite guest, but everyone knows what it means. A fever, probably, or something worse. No physician will come, they never do. And even if they did, their treatment might involve draining blood with leeches or applying warmed dung to the stomach. Sometimes the treatment kills faster than the illness. Still, Matilda's mother lights a candle to Saint Sebastian and prays. The rest of the village avoids the mill for now. You recall last winter, when 2 whole families died within 3 weeks. The priest said it was God's will. Others said it was the fleas. Midday meals and millstones. You get a short break to eat. Again. This time it's a hunk of cheese, hard, sour, and wrapped in a leaf to keep the flies off. The ale is weak, brewed in the cottage down the road. It's safer than water, but barely. Then it's time to carry sacks of grain to the mill. You're taxed here too. The miller keeps a portion for himself, a right granted by the Lord. You suspect he takes more than he should, but he's the only one who knows how to operate the machinery, and he's not afraid to threaten sabotage. The wheel turns slowly. Everything here does. The church and the charms, you pass the chapel on your way back. A single-room stone building, its mortar crumbling, and its cross splintered. The priest lives slightly better than you thanks to tithes. 1/10 of all your income paid whether you can afford it or not. Still, you go to Mass, you confess your sins, you fear purgatory, everyone does. So you carry a relic, a bone chip from a saint, or so you're told, and you whisper prayers to ward off demons. The priest sells indulgences. You don't fully understand what they are, but you know they cost money. Tonight, the village gathers to honor St. Cuthbert. There will be singing and some roasted roots and a story about the time he cured a blind cow. You'll pretend to enjoy it. Evening and the ever-dark back home. There's no light but a single rushlight. Animal fat-soaked, reeds burned in a clay dish. Shadows crawl up the walls. The roof leaks again. Your partner is snoring. The children are coughing. You can't read. No one you know can. You know the calendar only by saints' days and seasons. You count your years by winters survived. As you lay back on the straw, you think about the future. Not because it holds promise, but because it may not come. Every ache might be the start of something fatal. Every cough might be shared. You hope your eldest makes it through the year. She's nearly old enough to marry. You stare into the thatch and try to sleep. But your stomach growls. The pig is rooting again. And you remember that tomorrow, the reeve said something about digging ditches. But which ditches? And what happens if you forget? The cock crows late, but it doesn't matter. You were already awake. The same pains in your back, the same dull ache behind your eyes. Another day, another set of chores to serve a system you did not choose. The air in the cottage is heavy again, but this time with the smell of boiling cabbage and wool soaked from yesterday's rain. The hearth fire never truly goes out, even if it fades to embers. You poke at it with a charred stick, stir the pot, and wonder whether there will be meat this week. There probably won't be. Salt pork is a luxury. Even rats are scarce now that the dogs have grown cleverer. Today is Thursday. You know that not from a calendar, but from the pattern of your duties. And Thursday means more than fields. It means the manor court. The manor court. A peasant's parliament, each manor holds its own court, usually every few weeks. Presided over by the lord or his appointed steward, this court does not resemble any courtroom you've imagined. It convenes in the open air or a drafty hall, and the crimes are petty by modern standards. Failing to repair a hedge, allowing your pigs to roam loose using the wrong road to collect firewood. You don't want to go, but you have to. Attendance is mandatory. Absence is a fine, and the fines are endless. Today, Thomas of Lichfield is being accused of brewing ale without a license. That license must be purchased from the Lord, of course. Rumor says Thomas only made 3 gallons, and that it was for his sister's funeral. But none of that matters. The steward fines him 4 pence. His wife weeps. The rest of you look away. You're also called to testify on a boundary dispute between 2 neighboring families. Who owns which furrow in a plowed field? You mumble your account, trying not to favor either side. You don't want enemies. Not here. The court ends with a reading of new obligations. This week, the reeve announces that everyone must provide 1 day of ditch digging for a new drainage project. It's supposed to benefit the village, but more likely it will redirect water toward the Lord's barley. Seasons of labor. The peasant's year at his early spring now, and that brings its own rhythm. You measure time not in hours or days, but in tasks: plowing in February, sowing in March, weeding in May, hay in July, harvest in August and September. There are saints' days scattered throughout, offering some pause. But even those are spent preparing food or cleaning tools. Some villagers claim winter is the hardest season, with its biting cold and dwindling stores. But in truth, it's the growing seasons that grind you down. You rise earlier, sleep less, bend farther, and you never get ahead. The taxes, dues, and fees come year-round. Every bushel of grain, every pair of boots, every tool you sharpen, it all costs something. And when a poor harvest comes, you must borrow. From the Lord, or the priest, or the miller. Debt binds as tightly as soil. Marriage, birth, and death. A family's narrow choices. Your daughter, Agnes, is 13 now. Soon, you'll need to arrange a marriage. But you cannot simply pair her off. Marriage requires a fee to the Lord, called a merchet, paid, because you're giving away his laborer. The sum is small, perhaps a chicken or a few pence, but meaningful in a household like yours. There is no romance in marriage here. It's a calculation of work and survival. The boy she'll marry will bring an ox and a plot, maybe a little debt. The priest will bless them. Then they'll build another hovel just down the lane, and the cycle begins again. As for childbirth, no. Midwives. Only other women from the village, their hands stained with ash and linseed oil. Many babies don't live. Many mothers don't either. You've buried 2 already. And funerals? The priest will read the Latin rites. You won't understand a word. You'll pay him anyway, because if the dead aren't properly buried, they may wander food, flavor, and famine. Your diet doesn't change much. Bread, pottage, ale, occasionally fish if the stream cooperates. Dairy is for children. Vegetables are boiled to mush. Anything fresher or tastier goes to the manor kitchen. There the steward eats meat with every meal, spiced even. You've smelled cinnamon exactly once in your life. You still think about it. Salt is rare, so is vinegar. Most preservation is done with smoke, drying, or hope. But hunger doesn't announce itself loudly. It creeps. You begin by skipping seconds. Then you shrink your portion. Then you go to sleep earlier to forget. One morning you notice your belt fits differently and the baby looks thinner than she should. Last year there was talk of famine to the north. Bad rains ruined the rye. Mold took the rest. Dozens dead. And the Lord refused to open his granary. You wonder if the same could happen here. But what would you do? Rules, beliefs, and quiet superstition. Officially, your life is governed by the church and the manor. But beneath the surface is a world of whispered charms and old fears. You mark doorways. With chalk to keep out witches, you hang a dried rowan branch over the pigsty to ward off disease. You know which mushrooms are safe and which ones whisper to the dead. The priest calls it heresy. But even he walks the long way around the ancient yew tree by the chapel. Belief is everywhere. In the candles at Mass, in the bones of saints, in the faint hope that a dream might predict the harvest. You once saw a man refuse communion because he wore a sprig of juniper during Lent. He died 2 weeks later. Everyone nodded, quietly. God, they say, punishes curiosity. The manor and its machinery. The lord of the manor is rarely seen. He lives in the hall, stone walls, glazed windows, and a chimney. You've glimpsed it once on a feast day. He wore red, spoke French, smiled vaguely. He owns the land. All of it. Your house, your plot, even your tools technically. You cannot build a fence, cut a tree, or sell an egg without his permission. His steward and bailiff enforce these rights. They carry long lists, sealed letters, and endless instructions. They know your debts, your family's debts, your neighbor's livestock count. Occasionally, a royal tax comes down, and then it gets worse. The steward takes chickens, wool, or coin if you have it. If not, labor. Always labor. This is called fealty, your loyalty in exchange for the right to work the land. There is no contract, no parchment, just generations of obedience, moments of relief, holy days and quiet laughter. Not everything is work. Occasionally, there is relief. A saint's feast day brings a pause. The priest holds a longer mass. Children wear garlands. You might roast a rabbit or even share ale with neighbors. On midsummer, there's dancing around a bonfire. Laughter, too. You remember when someone wore the Reeves hat and sang rude songs. He was whipped later, but even he laughed at the time. At Michaelmas, you eat goose, if you're lucky. At Yule, you leave bread for spirits, and sometimes on a warm day after the fields are sown, you sit near the stream, feet bare, and just listen to the world go still. Birds, breeze, creaking trees. It feels like peace. But it never lasts. The storm that never ends, you think about the future again. It's not clear what changes, if anything. Your children may live longer than you, or not. The crops may be better next year, or worse. The Lord may die and be replaced by a kinder son. Or a crueler one. There's talk in other villages, rumors of peasants demanding freedoms, of people leaving their manors and hiding in towns. But the penalties are harsh. Branding, mutilation, death. You are not a rebel. You are a peasant. You endure. You whisper a prayer. Not for riches, just for rain when it's needed. For fewer rats. For the pig to stay healthy. As you extinguish the rushlight and curl into the straw once more, a question lingers. If this is the only life you've ever known, is it truly suffering or simply survival? The sun rises again, as it always does, behind a thick fog that refuses to lift until late morning. You stretch slowly, carefully. Your limbs don't extend as far as they used to. It's another day in the fields, and you know it by the wet smell of dew through the thatch, by the faint creak of the ox cart beyond the tree line, by the scraping of spoons against wooden bowls. You are older now. You have lived more seasons than most. The lines on your face deepen each winter, and though your hands have lost some strength, they have gained something too, a kind of knowledge that lives in the joints, in the memory of muscle and bone. You've become what others quietly call a wise one, though no one would dare say that aloud, not because it's forbidden, but because reverence is something unspoken among the poor. You have seen children born and buried. You have mended fences, planted hedges, brewed ale, helped dig ditches for a manor that will never be yours. And still, the manor looms, feudal inheritance. What passes down your son William is now of age. He has taken your place on the work roster, carrying out his labor dues, delivering grain to the granary, paying his penny to the priest. You still help, though slower. You supervise, you instruct, you try not to interfere. He is a good boy. Strong, thoughtful, but like all born into this life, his choices are few. The plot of land he now tills was granted to your grandfather by the Lord's grandfather. It is not ownership. It is tenancy, bound by duty and reinforced by fear. You've taught him how to count seeds by the fistful, how to thatch tightly before the storms, how to read the sky for frost. These are not lessons from a book. They're carved into your marrow. They come from failure, from hunger, from watching neighbors fall ill and not recover. You pass down the sickle, the wooden spoon, the patched cloak you once wore in your prime. These are not heirlooms. They are survival tools. They hold no wealth, but they hold everything. Peasant revolt? Not here. Not yet. In the year 1327, a village just a few days' walk from yours whispered of refusal. A young reeve named John, headstrong and literate, tried to organize a protest against increased labor taxes after a particularly poor barley harvest. He claimed to have read a sermon, one that said, "God made all men equal." That serfdom was unnatural. That labor should be honored, not extracted. John was arrested, beaten, fined beyond measure. His family fled to a nearby abbey for protection, but the Lord sent men to retrieve them. The priest made no protest. No one speaks of John now. His name is not banned. It is simply erased. You think of him sometimes, though, on those long days when your thoughts drift beyond the furrows and toward impossible ideas. What if he had succeeded? What would freedom have even looked like? You have no answer. But the question still burns, quietly. Work in the village. Specializations. And subtle shifts. Not everyone tills soil. In a well-established village, roles are more varied than outsiders think. There's Edwine the cooper who makes barrels. His fingers are stained with pitch, and his back is permanently hunched from bending oak staves. His daughter is a spinner, her hands quick and pale, constantly turning the distaff by the hearth. The miller has more power than he deserves. He grinds the grain, and always takes more than he should. Everyone knows it. No one stops him. He serves the Lord first. There's a carpenter, a blacksmith, and even a woman who tends to the sick using herbs, poultices, and strange prayers. Some call her a healer. Others call her dangerous. You've learned that survival depends on everyone. Each role, each skill, each set of calloused hands. You may resent the miller, distrust the reeve, avoid the steward, but without them, the system would buckle. It is a grim interdependence, like a wheel that can never stop turning, no matter how worn its spokes become. When the world knocks, famine, war, and rumor, outside your village, the world moves. Slowly, but it moves. There are whispers of war in France, of taxes raised to fund it, of a distant king who grows old and sick, of lords who fight over titles and lands while peasants sow fields beneath their banners. You see none of it, but you feel the tremors. Then comes the famine. It starts with a late frost one spring, then flooding, then a dry spell that bakes the soil to dust. The grain fails, the barley withers, even the weeds struggle. Your stores shrink early. The rats grow bold. People begin eating acorns, bark, whatever roots can be boiled into something passable. Starvation doesn't arrive in a wave, it arrives in weeks. Quietly, privately. Children cry at night. Old men grow silent. One morning, the healer's door remains closed, her fire unlit. She never wakes up. The Lord sends no help. He doubles the grain requisition instead. There is nothing poetic about famine. It is dull, gray. It erodes not just the body but hope. And then, like a passing storm, it ends. The next season is better. People eat, they mend. They laugh again, hesitantly. But something in the village has changed. Eyes are wearier, conversations quieter, trust thinner. The church, comfort and control. The priest still preaches every Sunday. His voice is strong, even when the congregation is thin. He speaks of salvation, of divine order, of heavenly reward for earthly suffering. You listen. You always have. But over time, his words seem more like repetition than revelation. The rituals are unchanged. The incense smells the same. But the meaning drifts. Still, you cling to the church because it's the only place that offers any hope of justice. If not in this life, then in the next. You still pay your tithe, though the cost bites. You still kneel, still mutter prayers, in a Latin you do not understand. You still cross yourself when the bell tolls, and when your granddaughter falls ill with a wasting fever, you sit by her side for hours, whispering the only words you know, Pater Noster, qui es in caelis. She survives. Somehow. You thank God, or the herbs, or luck. It doesn't matter. You're just grateful. A long life, a small life, a complete life. As you grow older, your role shifts. You no longer work the hardest rows. Your fingers are stiffer, now. But your mind stays sharp. You watch. You remember. You help settle disputes. You teach the young ones where the wild garlic grows. You advise during planting season. You hold the stories of floods, of plagues, of winters too cold to describe. No, one writes your name down. There are no paintings of you, no songs. But when you die, and you will likely in your sleep under the thatch roof you helped repair, your absence will echo in small ways. The boy who forgets how to yoke the ox. The girl who can't find the good clay for the hearth. The daughter who stares too long into the fire, remembering the words you whispered in the dark. Your life will not end. It will dissolve into soil, into memory, into the next season. And that in this world is all one can hope for. The quiet shifts of history. What you didn't know, as you lived and toiled and endured, is that change was slowly creeping into the corners of this world. A century after your death, the Black Death will come, wiping out a third of the population. The feudal bonds will weaken. Serfs will demand pay. Towns will swell. Lords will fear, revolt. Your great-grandchildren may know a different world, one with wages, with choice, with land that can be bought. But they will also forget things, like the old ways of marking time, the taste of pottage made from nettle and barley, the silent language of tools passed between generations. The world will remember kings and battles. Not you, but it was you who made the bread. You who tilled the soil. You who kept the fire. And without you, none of it would have happened. Reflection. We often remember history in terms of grand figures and decisive moments. But the beating heart of the past lies in the quiet, relentless lives of people like this medieval peasant. Their suffering was rarely recorded, their achievements often ignored. But in their quiet survival, they built the world that came after. How many untold lives like this shaped the very world we stand on? And what does it mean that we've forgotten them? Salt and silence, the forgotten roads of the Roman mule drivers. The road stretches endlessly ahead, flat and pale beneath the weight of hooves and wheels. You wake just before sunrise, rubbing stiff fingers against the raw canvas of your tunic. The scratch of wool against your neck, a reminder that warmth must be earned each morning. You're a mule driver, a mularius, and this is your life. Dust, leather straps, creaking carts, and the deep rhythmic patience that only beasts and men who travel long distances together can understand. Today is another leg of a long journey. You are carrying salt, white gold they call it, from the salt. Pans near Ostia, bound for settlements deep in the Apennines. Your cart creaks beneath the weight, and your two mules, Lucius and Brava, snort and shuffle as the cool air rises from the stones of the Via Salaria, the ancient Roman road named for this very trade. It is the 2nd century CE. Rome is the heart of an empire, but you do not live in marble halls or hear senators debate. You live between towns, among cargo and quiet roads. This is your empire. Dust, footsteps, and the endless pull of cart and coin. The quiet class. Mule drivers of the Roman roads. Your kind is rarely mentioned in the annals of history. The great writers of the age write of generals, gladiators, emperors, and poets, but not of you. Yet Rome runs on your wheels. Without you, the salt does not reach the frontier. The garrisons go unsupplied. The soldiers grow restless. The fish rot in their barrels before reaching inland markets. The roads crumble with disuse. You are a cog, silent, unnoticed, but utterly vital. And there are thousands like you. Some born into the trade, others hired by the state, others indebted, and with no other means of repaying their dues. You sleep under your cart. You eat whatever bread you can buy in roadside taverns. You mend your own leather harnesses, bandage your own feet, and know every stopping point between here and the far hills. You've seen others leave the trade, some to open stables, some to vanish in mountain passes, some to be claimed by fever or thieves. But you remain, because the road in its simplicity offers one thing most lives do not: clarity. Go here. Deliver this. Return. Salt. The humble power salt may seem dull, but in Rome, it is life. It preserves meat, cures fish, disinfects wounds, and flavors everything. Without it, food spoils, and armies falter. Roman soldiers receive part of their payment in salt, salarium, the root of the modern word salary. This substance, so small and pale, moves across the empire like blood. You are one of its carriers, arteries in a vast and often invisible system. The salt you carry was harvested days ago by men standing knee-deep in brine, their skin burnt and lined from years in the reflective glare of white ponds. You loaded the sacks yourself, checked their seals, and strapped them tight with twine. Each time you reach a military outpost, a small market town, or a villa estate, you hand off a portion of your cargo. Not all at once, bit by bit. A trade here, a toll there. Your journey is not one clean delivery, but a series of transactions, each one essential to someone else's survival. And when the salt runs out, you turn around and do it again. Life on. The road. Taverns, ditches, and waypoints you know every mancho. The official state inns placed roughly a day's travel apart. But those are for imperial couriers or officers with warrants. You? You sleep in the mule barns if they have them. or under a lean-to, or more often, with nothing but a blanket and your own smell to keep you warm. You eat at Capone, roadside taverns that serve cheap wine, hot lentils, and endless rumors. Here you hear news before it becomes history. A slave revolt in Sicily. Bandits near Beneventum. A new emperor? Maybe. Or maybe just another general with too much ambition. You avoid politics. Not out of fear, but because you have no stake in it. Empires rise and fall. The road remains. You mark your days by mile markers, carved stones left by Roman engineers, noting distances to the capital. They are your clocks, your calendars, your reminders of just how far you've come. The mule, silent partner in a hard. Life. Lucius and Brava are your lifeline. You know their moods, their injuries, their strengths. You walk beside them most of the time, not atop the cart, because your weight is not worth their strain. You speak to them constantly, more out of habit than belief that they understand. But perhaps they do. They seem to know when you're angry, or tired, or worried about the dark clouds rolling over the mountains. At night, you rub their legs with vinegar and oil to prevent swelling. You sleep within earshot of their breathing, ready to wake at the first snort of danger. They do not complain. They simply move forward. You often wonder if your relationship is closer to theirs than to other humans. After all, they are the only constant companions you have. The dangers of the journey bandits are a risk always, especially in narrow mountain passes or far from the protection of garrisons. You carry a short blade, but you know it's mostly for show. Sometimes you travel in convoys with other mule drivers, especially when crossing lawless stretches. You share stories, supplies, and crude jokes. Sometimes you mourn together when a man doesn't make it to the next stop. There's also the weather. Rains can wash out bridges. Snow can trap you for days. Summer heat makes the animals sluggish and spoils anything not sealed in clay jars. Then there are the officials, the tax collectors, inspectors, and toll keepers. They stop you often, demanding bribes, checking your goods, pretending to enforce order while skimming off your time and profit. But you know how to nod, how to wait, how to answer questions with the right mix of ignorance and respect. It is an art. You are not a rebel. You are a survivor. Moments of strange peace. Sometimes in the long stretches where nothing happens, no rain, no thieves, no shouting soldiers, you feel something close to peace. You notice the way the light cuts through pine branches at noon, the distant call of birds you can't name, the crunch of hooves on gravel, the warmth of the sun through your threadbare cloak. You think about your mother who once told you the road was cursed, that those who travel too long lose their place in the world. Maybe she was right. You can barely remember your childhood. Village now. Just a stone well and the way the wind smelled before rain. But you don't feel lost. You feel in motion, and that somehow is enough. A routine. Broken, just as the rhythm of your journey begins to settle again. Something changes. At the last village before the mountain crossing, you hear an unusual order. A Roman magistrate, far from any major city, has requested an enormous shipment of salt, more than any private citizen should need. He is building something, stockpiling. No one knows why. The locals say he's paranoid, that he fears a rebellion, that he's digging tunnels beneath his villa. You don't know what to believe. You only know you're expected to deliver half your cargo directly to him, ahead of schedule, up a steep and disused road. It's off your route. It's dangerous. But you have no choice. You gather your pack, check your mules, and begin the slow ascent into the hills. The sky darkens. You wonder as the wind rises what salt is truly worth to a man who hides in stone walls and buys silence in bulk. You're climbing now. The regular Via Salaria is behind you, flat, predictable, Roman-built. In its place is a winding trail, worn but not forgotten, snaking into a narrow gorge. The air shifts here, cooler, damper, scented with moss and stone. Even the mules are slower, uncertain with each step. You mutter encouragements to Lucius, and, brava as the cart creaks in protest, The wheels groan, the wood protesting the strain. You're carrying nearly 200 Roman pounds of salt on your back axle, packed in thick goat hide sacks, some of which are already beginning to soften from the mist. You've delivered salt to strange places before. A crumbling fortress here, a suspicious priest there. But this is different. There's no name for this road, no markers, no others on the path. And yet someone has swept the trail recently. An unexpected villa by dusk. You spot the structure. Not a simple outpost or crumbling farmhouse, but a villa. Large, sprawling, and quiet. The walls are unusually high. The gates, iron-shod oak, stand open, but no one waits to greet you. You whistle low. Brava's ears twitch. The villa is perched precariously on a rocky rise. Around it, steep drops, overgrown terracing, and the remains of what once were olive trees. You pass under the gate's arch, noting the Latin inscription above. Pax in umbra, peace in the shadow. Odd. You're met not by a steward or slave, but by a man in a worn tunic and patched sandals. His eyes are sharp, though sunken with fatigue. He says nothing at first, only gestures you forward. You follow, uncertain. The magistrate's request, he leads you past shuttered windows and silent halls. No music, no smell of cooking fires. Just the thick, heavy air of stone and silence. Finally, he brings you to a courtyard, square, perfectly symmetrical, lined with columns of veined marble. In the center, a small pool covered in a green film of still water. There, seated on a carved bench beside the pool, is the magistrate. He is younger than expected, perhaps 40. His hair is neatly cropped, but his robe hangs loosely, as if draped in haste. He greets you without rising, his voice soft but controlled. You have the salt? You nod. As requested, 200 libri, half my cargo. He says nothing more, just waves his attendant forward. Together you unload the sacks. You place them in an ante-room that looks more like a wine cellar than a storeroom. No guards watch, no scales measure. You are trusted, it seems, but the unease lingers, the hidden fear. The magistrate speaks again, only once the door closes behind the last sack. Do you know why salt matters? He asks. You blink. You weren't expecting philosophy. To preserve food, you say. To season it, to keep meat from rotting. He smiles slightly, but the smile does not reach his eyes. To bind loyalty, he says. Salt is memory, a promise, a covenant. You say nothing. There's little room for metaphor on the road. He leans back, gazing at the motionless pool. They forget what it costs to keep peace. The grain ships come late, the roads break down, the soldiers grow lean. But salt, it endures. Salt does not lie. You begin to feel like you're no longer part of a delivery, that perhaps you've entered a different story entirely. A night at the villa, you're invited to stay the night. You hesitate, but it's late, and the mountain road is dangerous, by moonlight. You're shown to a small guest room, simple but clean. A clay lamp flickers faintly by the door. Bread and watered wine await you on a wooden tray. You eat slowly, listening. The villa is too quiet. No laughter, no singing from servants, not even footsteps. Once, you think you hear chanting. Soft, rhythmic, echoing through the walls. But when you lean your ear closer, it fades. You sleep poorly. Your dreams are thick and shapeless. The morning ritual at dawn, you awaken to the sound of soft voices in the courtyard. Peeking through the wooden slats of the window, you see the magistrate again, now barefoot, dressed in a plain white tunic. He stands by the pool, surrounded by 4 others, older men, their heads shaved. They pour small pinches of salt into the water. A rite, a prayer, a superstition, they chant softly. You recognize a few words, something about binding the past, about keeping corruption at bay. You do not understand the full meaning, but you understand fear when you see it. The magistrate is not just stockpiling salt. He is hiding from something, departure and a warning. By mid-morning, you're ready to leave. The cart is lighter now. The road ahead will be faster, easier, but before you go, the magistrate appears again. He thanks you, not formally but with a quiet nod. He presses a small purse into your hand. Silver, more than your fee. And then, as you turn to go, he says one final thing. If anyone asks, tell them nothing. Say you lost half the cargo to a landslide. Or thieves. It does not matter. You stop. But there's a receipt, your seal, on the scroll. He smiles faintly. It won't be found. You meet his gaze for a moment, and then instinctively, nod. You do not ask questions. You've seen enough to know that silence, like salt, preserves things. Back to the road. You descend quickly. Lucius is restless, and Brava seems eager to be away. The cart rattles with only half its weight. By the time you reach the main road again, the sun is high. You meet other mule drivers at a roadside taberna. They ask about your delay. You lie easily now. Storm washed the trail. Had to wait. They nod. Nothing unusual. The news they carry, however, is not so ordinary. There's a military unit headed north, one says. Not marching, dispatched, looking for a rogue magistrate, something about illegal hoarding. You keep your face still, you chew your bread, you sip your wine. The conversation moves on. The weight of knowing, you resume your route. Deliver the remaining salt to a farmstead and a provincial market. The scroll with the magistrate's seal? It vanishes from your pack. Perhaps you dropped it, or perhaps someone took it while you slept. You don't look for it. In the following weeks, you hear rumors. The villa was raided, the magistrate executed, others vanished, the salt gone. No trial, but it no longer matters. Salt, once dissolved, cannot be reclaimed. You continue on. New cargo, new roads, same mules, same silence, yet you feel different now. As if you've touched something deeper than trade routes and tolls. You remember his words. Salt does not lie. But what then does it reveal? And if the empire can silence a man who hoarded salt, what else has it already erased? The road is quieter now. You've traveled for years, too many to count with certainty. The Via Salaria, once a thread stretched tightly between supply and demand, has frayed at the edges. The towns grow smaller, the markets thinner, the inns less crowded. And you? You are older. Your beard is streaked with gray. Your hands ache more, each morning slow to close around reins and rope. Brava has gone lame and was sold to a local farmer. Lucius still trudges on, loyal but weary. You replaced Brava with a new mule, young and spirited but not yet tuned to the rhythm of your steps. The days blend. The salt still moves, but the world has shifted around you. The empire's quiet cracks. You see the signs before they're written in stone. A bridge out, unrepaired for weeks. A Roman mile marker pulled down, used for local construction. The Mancio at the 20th mile now occupied by squatters. The official posts, the ones once staffed by clerks and engineers, are empty. Their walls bear the fading insignia of imperial order. You hear more whispers now, of soldiers not paid, of garrisons abandoned, of governors refusing orders from Rome. Rome itself? Distant, abstract. The mule drivers still whisper over lentil stew in roadside taverns, but the talk is different. Less about taxes and tolls, more about which routes are still safe, which magistrates are still trustworthy, which markets still pay in coin and not promises. It is still the 2nd century, but time has begun its quiet collapse. You see it in the eyes of the villagers who no longer expect a cart to arrive. You see it in the way roads decay, and in how no one comes to repair them. The return to the villa one spring afternoon, you find yourself passing near the region where the magistrate once held his silent villa, the place where you left the salt, where the chanting echoed off the walls, and where fear wrapped itself in marble. You hadn't intended to return, but a farmer in a mountain village offers good coin for salt, and the shortcut cuts too close to the old trail to ignore. Curiosity pulls at you, a subtle itch beneath the skin. You take the turn. Lucius somehow remembers the path. The road is rougher now, Brush has reclaimed its edges. Insects hum in the still air. A landslide has narrowed part of the upper trail, forcing you to dismount and guide the cart by hand. Then, just past the final bend, you see it. The villa, or what remains. Its outer walls have partially collapsed. The gates hang crooked, one twisted off its hinges. Ivy crawls up the stone and the smell of mildew wafts from within. You hesitate, but still, you walk forward. The stillness of ruin. No one guards the entrance now. The inner courtyard, once pristine and geometric, is littered with fallen tiles. The central pool is dry. The marble benches are cracked. One bears black scorch marks. And there, in the shadows of the colonnade, are remnants of the salt sacks you delivered years ago. Some still intact, sealed tightly, white and crystalline. Others, burst open, have turned into stiff, chalky masses. Under sun and rain, you kneel beside one and break a lump loose. It crumbles in your hand, dry and bitter. There is no sign of the magistrate, no bones, no belongings, only silence, only memory. You do not stay long. The wind picks up and you feel watched, though no eyes are there. You whisper a few words, uncertain whether prayer or apology, and guide Lucius back to the road. The salt that was never delivered. Back on the main road, you make your deliveries. The farmer pays in full. The new mule behaves, but your mind lingers on the villa, on the magistrate's words, on the rituals at dawn. The rest of the salt, the half you carried onward, has long since passed through kitchens, cured meats, washed wounds. Its grains have dissolved into meals and rivers and histories too small to record. But the other half, the hoarded, hidden, sacred half, never reached its purpose. What was it meant for? You ask in taverns cautiously. Some remember rumors of a magistrate gone mad, of illegal temples, of purges, of imperial investigators whose reports never made it to Rome. Others speak of more ancient things, that salt buried in excess was a way to contain spirits, that the villa was built atop something older, a pre-Roman shrine, a forbidden hill. You dismiss it mostly. You've seen too many roads to believe in ghosts. But still, at night, you sometimes dream of the pool, of the chanting, and of salt, stacked like walls. The end of the Runtime passes. Lucius dies. You bury him near a stream just off the Via Salaria. You dig with your hands, not tools. You place a stone over the mound. No inscription, just a small handful of salt poured into the soil. The new mule takes over, but something in you closes with Lucius's passing. You begin to carry less. Travel shorter distances. Spend more time in the villages you once rushed past. The road. Once. Your lifeline now feels foreign, changed, and one day you stop. You sell the cart, the harness, the gear. You keep only the small knife, the cloak, and a pouch of coarse salt. You settle in a hill town near a crumbling outpost. Offer your services as a stable hand. No one asks your history. You offer none. Each evening, you walk to the edge of town and watch the road stretch into the horizon. The final grain years later, Rome is still there, but different. The empire is splintering. Borders shrink, legions mutter. Emperors rise and fall like storm waves. New coins are minted, and the roads are neglected. Few remember the salt routes anymore. Fewer still remember the villa. You are old now. Your bones ache. Your memories fade, but you never forget the feel of the reins in your hand. The sound of Lucius's hooves. The dry sting of salt in cracked fingers. And when you are dying, quietly, in a small room above the stable, you ask for one thing, not wine, not coins, just a pinch of salt. They place it on your tongue, and for a moment the road returns, the wind on your face, the crunch of gravel, the distant hum of Roman life pulsing just beyond the hills, then silence, then peace. Reflection. The roads that made the empire. History does not remember the mule drivers, not in statues, not in scrolls, but it was they who held the empire together. Grain by grain, sack by sack, they moved not just salt but the foundation of civilization. Order, supply, preservation. The roads they traveled crumbled. The cities they fed collapsed, but the idea they served that survival rests on humble labor, that the smallest details matter, remains. Salt is dull, but it saves lives. So too did the men who carried it. And maybe that's the most enduring kind of legacy, not to be remembered with glory, but to have quietly mattered. The man who weighed shadows. Tax inspectors of the Abbasid Caliphate. You are not a warrior, not a merchant, nor a mystic, nor a prince with robes edged in gold. You sit behind a low desk. Your fingers are stained with ink. Your back aches from long hours bent over scrolls. The sound you know best is not the clash of swords or the call to prayer, but the scratch of the reed pen against parchment. You are a Khatib al-Jibya, a tax scribe in the Abbasid Caliphate, and your entire world exists in ink, ledgers, and long days of silence. It is the year 823 CE. You live and work in the city of Wasit, nestled between Kufa and Basra, a town of canals and slow commerce. Here the bureaucracy breathes like a second skin. Palaces rise in glimmering plaster and geometric tile, but the real power hums beneath, in narrow hallways filled with clerks. You are one of them, and the fate of 1,000 lives might rest on where you place a decimal mark. The hidden empire. Most. Remember the Abbasid Caliphate for its scholars, philosophers, and architects, for the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, for al-Khwarizmi and algebra, for poets who could turn a breath into verse. But beneath this golden age lay a machinery of astonishing complexity. You are part of that machine. Your job, to calculate the kharaj, land tax, owed from estates worked by peasants, nobles, or absentee landowners. The taxes you compute fund everything: irrigation canals in the north, schools in Damascus, border patrols in Egypt, and scholars in Kufa. Without the records you maintain, the empire would starve, not in hunger, but in structure. And the empire is vast. From the green edges of the Maghreb to the snows of Transoxiana, from the dry hills of Syria to the jungles of Sind, the Abbasid Caliphate stretches across 3 continents. You, however, rarely leave your desk a day in the ledger. House your day begins before dawn. The streets of Wasit are still blue with morning shadows as you step into the records building. It's a domed hall, lined with shelves stacked to the ceiling with scrolls and reed-bound folios. The air smells of dust, ink, and the subtle tang of vinegar used to preserve parchment. You take your seat among dozens of others, each hunched over their own set of accounts. Your tools are few: a column or reed pen, trimmed weakly with your bone-handled knife, a pot of soot-based ink, thick and slow to dry, a set of scrolls written in Diwani script, elegant and tightly coiled, a stack of warak, fine paper imported from Samarkand, a single abacus with beads carved from apricot wood. Your task: audit the quarterly reports from landowners in the Awaz region. Cross-reference crop yields, irrigation permits, livestock counts, rainfall notes, and last year's tax exemptions. Flag discrepancies. Assign inspection orders. Every mistake, every rounding error, has consequences. Raise. A tax too high and peasants starve too low, and you rob the caliph's treasury. You carry no sword, but your pen, in its quiet way, rules a province. Voices behind the numbers. A man appears at your desk, a tall, thin landowner with calloused hands and soft eyes. He brings his ledger and a thin smile. His account seems accurate. Barley yields, sheep counts, market trades, but something's wrong, too clean, too regular. You question him gently. He smiles again, slightly wider. Says he is an honest man. His father tilled the land, his grandfather too. But you remember last season's rainfall in Awaz. A drought, fields left dry. Your memory says no. Such yield could have emerged unscathed. You ask him to return tomorrow. He bows, leaves. Then you make a note in red ink. Possible inflation of output. Assign inspector, it is a small act. But in that moment, you may have saved an entire village from unjust taxation, or condemned a man to be fined for the sins of honesty. You will never know which. Weeks later, the inspector returns. He's a hardened man, used to long journeys, swollen rivers, and nervous hosts. He carries a copy of your note, and a new scroll, his findings. You unroll it. Indeed, the landowner lied. The drought was worse than recorded. The barley harvest was half of what he claimed. He had bribed 2 village elders to co-sign his false totals. The inspector uncovered it all with quiet patience and a pair of clever questions. You make adjustments. The tax is halved. The bribery is noted, not prosecuted, yet. That decision is above your pay grade. But your record now bears the truth. Truth is not beautiful. It is not satisfying, but it is clear, and that clarity will survive you. The fragile system, the Abbasid system, work for now. But the signs of stress are emerging. Local governors, emirs, begin to retain more revenue for themselves. The caliph's missives, once obeyed within days, now arrive to shrugs and delays. Tribal leaders assert more autonomy, and scholars in remote provinces begin to question not only the reach of Baghdad, but the religious legitimacy of the rulers themselves. Meanwhile, your work continues, but you're copying more errors. Your colleagues grumble louder. The ink budget has been cut. A famine in the north forces a tax moratorium in 2 provinces. You revise dozens of scrolls. The corrections ripple outward, altering what Baghdad expects to receive, what the local emir is allowed to withhold, and what the caliphate's scholars can afford to purchase in the next quarter. You cause these changes not by choice, but by process. No one remembers your name. But the ink you place in a margin today may shape a poem recited in Cairo a year from now, or stop a school from closing in Tabriz. A whisper of rebellion. One evening, as you walk home past the river's edge, you hear it rumor. A rebellion in Khorasan, not a large one, just a small group. Local farmers, disillusioned clerics, a former tax officer. They claim the system is broken, that Baghdad has forgotten its provinces, that taxes are unjust, unequally enforced, that landowners bribe inspectors and poor farmers pay for palaces. You say nothing, but you remember the man who tried to lie. You remember how close he came to getting away with it. The rebellion is crushed quickly, but it leaves you thinking, what happens when too many scrolls are wrong? When ink no longer reflects reality? And what role do you play when obedience to system means betrayal of truth? Legacy in ink. You continue for a few more years. Your ledgers grow thicker. Your pen hand grows stiffer. Your scrolls are stored in the Wasit archive, a vast stone room sealed with wax stamps and guarded by men with spears. You sometimes think, when I am gone, who will read these? Will some future clerk look at your tidy numerals and trust them? Will a historian 100 years hence interpret your decisions through the lens of collapse? Will anyone know that you stayed late most nights, just to get the decimals right? Because the fate of nations once rested on your hand's steadiness, and history, like ledgers, is only as accurate as the person who wrote it. In the quiet halls of the tax records office in Wasit, you still sit at your desk. Your reed pen scratches out the story of an empire, not in battles or declarations, but in barley counts, water rights, and harvest reports. The empire lives in your ledgers, and you are one of its unseen architects. But now you're beginning to wonder, how solid are the foundations you've built? The ink dries fast, but the truth? The truth shifts. The tax map. That isn't real. You're tasked with a new project. The caliph's chief fiscal officer in Baghdad has issued a decree. All districts must submit updated tax maps showing productive land, ownership, irrigation sources, and taxable categories. You're given 2 months. And a problem. Much of the information is outdated, or worse, based on assumptions passed down from scribe to scribe like family recipes. One clerk claims an estate produces wheat, another insists it's millet. The landowner says nothing at all, content to pay a low lump sum and keep the mystery to himself. You dispatch 2 field inspectors. They return with conflicting stories. One says the estate is partly abandoned. The other says it's thriving under tenant labor, hidden from formal records. You make a note in the margin. Discrepancy unresolved. Submit estimated average yield. It's a bureaucratic solution. Elegant, useless. And you begin to wonder how many of the empire's productive districts are just paper cities, places that exist in the archive but nowhere on the soil. The peasant who had no name one day, a group of villagers arrives. They are from a nearby canal village listed on your ledgers as Village 38A, part of the Tigris irrigation sector. You've taxed them for rice cultivation and goat herding. Their spokesman, a middle-aged farmer with sun-wrinkled skin and a reed hat, speaks slowly and deliberately. He says the village no longer grows rice. The canal collapsed 2 years ago during the spring flood. No one came to repair it. They now grow lentils and graze sheep. But your ledger still expects the courage for rice. You explain the dilemma. Changes must be filed, inspected, cross-verified. It could take 6 months, maybe a year. They say they don't have that long. Then the spokesman leans in. He asks, "Have you ever seen our fields?" You haven't. You know their yields, their names, their tax codes, but you've never seen the earth under their feet. You promise to visit. And you do. The field beyond the ledger, it's a half-day journey. When you arrive, the village is smaller than you imagined. A few dozen homes, children playing with bits of scrap, goats nibbling at dry weeds. You walk the dried-out canal. The damage is obvious. Stone walls cracked, silt piled high. You see the lentils, scraggly but growing. You see the sheep, thin but alive. The spokesman offers you lentil stew and flatbread. You eat slowly, sitting on a mat under a date palm. No one here knows the word courage. They call the tax the taking, not cruelly, just matter of fact. They aren't angry, but they are tired. And for the first time, so are you. The mirage of standardization. Back in Wasit, you begin reviewing other village reports with a more skeptical eye. You notice things. A district claimed identical yields for 5 years straight. Impossible. Another reports the same number of working animals despite a noted plague 2 years prior. A northern village pays taxes on flax production, yet the region's climate shifted a decade ago. No flax could grow there now. You try to raise these issues in the weekly clerks' meeting, but your superior, a rotund man with gold rings and a fondness for apricot dates, waves your concern away. "We go by the records," he says. "Not rumors." You sit back, and you understand. The Abbasid system values appearance over adaptation. It demands order, even if order is built on assumptions. The empire doesn't collapse in rebellion. It collapses in sameness. A whisper in the archive one evening. Deep in the archive halls, you find an old ledger from the reign of Caliph Harun al-Rashid. It's handwritten, beautiful. The script so fine it looks carved. The figures are immaculate. Margins are tight. It's the record of a province now swallowed by desert winds. But then you notice a scribble in the back. A note, unsigned. "These numbers please the Caliph, but not the earth." We all lie now just to keep the line straight. You read it twice. Then again, you feel, for the first time, seen. The inspector's letter weeks later, you receive a sealed scroll. It's from an inspector you once mentored, a younger man named Abbas, whom you trained in cross-checking harvest types and watching for double-counted livestock. He writes from the outskirts of Syria. His report is blunt. "I visited 3 villages. 2 were empty. The third pretended to exist. The landowners hired men to act as peasants, tilling soil for a single day before we arrived. I stayed longer. I watched them leave the next morning. The land is empty. The taxes are fake." You write back simply, "And yet we will tax them anyway." He never replies. You hear rumors he left the service and joined a merchant caravan to Samarkand. You envy him. A quiet defiance, you begin making subtle corrections. You adjust figures downward. Not radically, just slightly more in line with what you now believe to be real. You begin recording annotations instead of assumptions. You recommend suspensions instead of penalties. And you include one phrase softly inserted in small cursive on questionable ledgers. Pending field confirmation. You do not tell anyone. You are not changing the empire. You are only making it less wrong. 1 decimal at a time. The last scroll 1. Spring. A new decree arrives. Mandatory retirement for clerks over 60. You are 63. They give you a scroll of thanks, a pouch of silver, a new robe. No one mentions your annotations. No one reads the ledgers you've corrected. No one asks if the numbers were real. You walk home with the robe under your arm and the pouch growing heavier in your hand. And for the first time in decades, you will not have to wake before dawn and account for land you've never touched. But you wonder, will the man who replaces you know how to tell a lie from a ledger? You no longer wake before dawn. Your hands no longer smell of ink. The kalam sits unused in a box beneath your bed. The scrolls and ledgers, those steady companions for over 3 decades, are someone else's burden now. You are retired, and in retirement, you begin to see the empire with different eyes. Not as a machine of records, but as a fragile network of assumptions, each ledger connected to another by trust and habit. You once believed the system brought order, but now you know it brought certainty, and certainty is not the same as truth. And somewhere in that gap, the empire is beginning to crack. Whispers of disintegration. You hear the stories over cups of tea in the local bazaar. The post from Samara is late, again. Bandits in the Zagros Mountains. Tax revolts in Fars province. A new emir in Egypt refusing to send tribute. Governors now call themselves autonomous, a polite word for rebellion. Even the scribes in Wasit whisper of inconsistencies. Entire districts gone unreported. Inspectors missing. Revenues drying up like summer rivers. But the scrolls still come. The ledgers are still bound. The numbers still align. On paper, the empire endures, but paper is easy to please. You know this better than anyone. An empire of ledgers at the peak of Abbasid bureaucracy. The Caliphal treasury employed thousands. The tax offices were organized, with remarkable detail. Diwan al-Kharaj for land taxes. Diwan al-Zimam for oversight and auditing. Diwan al-Barid for communication via horse couriers. Diwan al-Mustagalat for managing state properties. Each office operated independently yet in orbit around the Caliphal core. It was a system of duplication, cross-verification, redundancy, all designed to catch fraud, ensure continuity, and maintain balance. But in time, the very strength of this system became its flaw. Too rigid, too slow, too unwilling to admit that the earth no longer matched the map, and all of it depended on men like you, quiet clerks with tired eyes and good memory, just doing their jobs. The forgotten clerk's error, a decade after your retirement, you hear of a crisis in Basra. A drought, a failed tax season, and a merchant convoy that never arrived. The treasury in Baghdad demands explanations, but the records show no sign of problem. In fact, the district reported a surplus. It takes months to realize the mistake. A junior clerk copied last year's figures word for word, not out of malice, just exhaustion, or perhaps fear. The figures looked right. They kept the lines straight. But they were wrong. The caliph's treasury collapses into shortfall. Payments to border troops are delayed. Soldiers in Khorasan riot. A governor in Armenia declares independence, all from a single copying error. And you think it was never just ink. Echoes of collapse. By the year 861, you are an old man, and the caliph, al-Mutawakkil, is murdered by his own guards. You hear it first, from a spice cellar. The news travels slowly, carried not by couriers but by rumor. Then confirmation arrives. The caliph's son ascends, but he is weak. And behind him, the Turkish military commanders begin to divide the court like merchants haggling over a bazaar rug. What follows is known now as the anarchy at Samarra, a 9-year period of palace coups, puppet caliphs, assassinations, and factional bloodshed. You, of course, are no longer involved, but you know what caused it. Not only ambition, not just greed. It was the rot in the ledgers, the decay hidden in numbers, the fact that no one really knew what the empire was anymore, only what the ink said it was. The last visit, one day, a young clerk visits you. He has your old job. He carries a scroll with your handwriting, an annotation you made 2 decades ago on an obscure estate near Awaz. He asks what you meant by seasonal discrepancy, assume median yield. You stare at the scroll. You remember the case. A dispute between 2 brothers over irrigation rights. You took the average to avoid igniting a feud. It wasn't accurate, but it was peaceful. You explain this. The young man nods quietly. Then he asks, "How often did you estimate rather than confirm?" You hesitate, then answer honestly, "More often than I wanted to, less often than I could have." He nods again. You see it in his eyes, the same quiet resignation, the same weight of someone asked to quantify the unknowable. You tell him, "Write carefully, even when no one reads it." He bows, thanks you, and leaves. And just like that, the office has visited your home for the last time. The archive burns in 875. You receive word from a distant relative in Baghdad. The Wasit archives, your archive, were burned in a fire during a local uprising. Rebels stormed the tax office. Scrolls were thrown into the Tigris. Ledgers, account books, irrigation reports, all gone. No one knows who started the fire, or whether it was deliberate. You feel something between sorrow and release. So many years, so many pages, so few ever read. You close your eyes and imagine the scrolls unraveling in the water, the ink running into the river like black veins. It is not the fate you wanted, but it is honest. Reflection at the end, and now, near the end of your life, you sit by the riverbank, cane in hand, watching the barges pass under the evening sun. No monuments were built in your name. No books quote your judgments. Your legacy lives in 2 places: the fading scrolls that outlived their purpose, and the invisible lines you drew to hold a crumbling world together. Was it enough? Perhaps not. But you now know something your younger self did not. That an empire is not made of palaces or armies or gold. It is made of agreements, of belief, of numbers that once made sense. And when those numbers become habit instead of fact, even the greatest caliphate becomes a mirage. The Abbasid Empire would survive for centuries more, but it would never regain its clarity. Its golden age had passed, washed away not in fire or war, but in misfiled scrolls, ignored warnings, and the slow erosion of truth beneath routine. And so you sit quietly as the sun sets over Wasit, no sword drawn, no battle fought, only the memory of ink. And the question, how many empires have collapsed, not from rebellion, but from trusting the wrong numbers for too long? The city that couldn't sleep, the nighttime lives of 17th century Londoners. It is not the version of London you might imagine, not yet smog-choked, not yet swallowed by factories, no red telephone boxes, no underground train tunnels humming beneath your feet. Instead, this is London, 1661, the city of candle smoke, echoing church bells, and wooden shutters clapped shut against the chill, and it is night, which means your day is just beginning. When nightfall was not the end in the 17th century, the sun might set, but people didn't simply go to bed. The idea that nighttime was for sleep alone is a modern invention. In Restoration London, darkness signaled transition, not conclusion. The wealthy might host salons and dinners. Tavern-goers gathered for ale and gossip. The working poor such as nightmen, rat-catchers, and milkmaids often started their labor under moonlight. Prostitutes plied their trade in alleys and on bridges. Criminals, too, found cover in the city's shadow. You live here, perhaps as a journeyman printer, AI, candlemaker's assistant, or a laundress. Whoever you are, your body knows the city's rhythm. 2 sleeps, with a stretch of alertness in the middle. For most Londoners, the night is split. First sleep begins not long after dusk and ends sometime around midnight. Then comes a period of wakefulness, an hour or two, sometimes more. During this time, people might pray, write, stoke fires, or visit neighbors. It is an accepted part of life. You don't even question it. And then comes second sleep. But tonight, you do not sleep at all. Night walking. There's a word for people like you. Night walker. Not a criminal necessarily, though that term is used by the constables when they want to. No, in your case, you walk because sleep is a luxury, or simply doesn't come. So you move through Cheapside's narrow streets, where the last of the merchants are shuttering their shops. You pass St. Mary le Bow. It's bell silent now. The cobbles are slick with a light mist, and in the distance the Thames glimmers like black oil under the moonlight. At this hour, the city changes. It unfolds. You hear things. Arguments behind shutters. The creak of a sign swinging in the wind. The sudden burst of laughter from an upstairs room. The city breathes differently at night, and you are learning to understand its nocturnal language. The city's nocturnal workers. You turn a corner and spot a night soil man, his cart rumbling softly. He collects human waste from cesspits and privies, hauling it beyond the city walls before dawn. It's a thankless job, but a necessary one. London produces more filth than daylight can handle. Nearby, a link boy, no more than 10 years old, holds a torch and calls out for customers needing a guide through the dark alleys. For a penny, he'll light your way. Across the square, a watchman with a halberd dozes by a lamppost, his dog curled up beside him. He's meant to keep the peace, though everyone knows he sleeps more than he patrols. Each of these people plays a role in the city's hidden infrastructure. A parallel London, one that operates between curfew and dawn. You are part of it now, even if only for tonight. Life after curfew. Curfew still exists in name, though it has faded in practice. Bells ring in many parishes around 9 o'clock, signaling time to douse lights and return indoors, but few obey it. Instead, the curfew bell has become more of a social marker, a reminder that what happens after this hour is private, even secret. Gossip, deals, seductions, and sins all thrive in this liminal space. Inside the taverns, flickering with firelight and warmed ale, apprentices drink past their wages. Gentlemen play dice or whisper over French wines and news from court. The Restoration is in full swing. King Charles II is back on the throne, and London is breathing again after a decade of Puritan austerity. But there's a tension under the revelry. Too many people. Too little money. A government rebuilding its authority. Night gives them all a place to hide. A city without clocks, you carry no timepiece. Most don't. Pocket watches are rare, expensive, and unreliable. Public clocks exist, but bells are more dependable than hands on a dial, so you measure the hour by sound and feel. When the fishmongers in Eastcheap begin preparing for market, it is close to 4. When the bakers stoke their ovens, it is nearer 5. Time is fluid, lived rather than counted, but the city still moves on an unseen schedule, a dance of habit and repetition, and you, like everyone else, have learned to move with it. The uninvited. Guests of the dark, of course. Not everyone belongs to the night by choice. The darkness hides more than tradesmen. You walk along the edge of Fleet Ditch, a slow, foul-smelling canal, and hear the rustle of movement. You quicken your pace. Cut purses, gangs, and footpads know that those walking late may carry coin or secrets worth selling. The law does not sleep, but it does look away. The Old Bailey hears cases of night crimes every week. Pickpocketing, burglary, illegal assemblies, even sodomy, each treated with suspicion or fear. There are whispers, 2 of witches who gather under the moon, of restless spirits, of bodies stolen from graveyards. Most of it is nonsense, yet you find yourself watching the shadows more carefully, because in London, what you cannot see can still harm you. The privilege of candles. You pass a townhouse glowing with candlelight behind every window. The wealthy do not sleep like the poor. They dine late, their hours modeled after the French court. They can afford beeswax candles, which burn cleaner and longer than the cheap tallow candles used by most. And candles mean control. They control time. They let the rich read after dark, pray longer, write letters, entertain guests, or simply avoid the pressing weight of sleep. For the poor, light is rationed. Every candle burned is a choice. Light to sew or light to eat. This, too, is a kind of curfew, not imposed by law but by economy. Returning home before dawn. Eventually, the sky begins to change. It is not sunrise yet, but the stars start to fade. The chill in the air deepens. The city begins to wake again. Milkmaids move through the streets with wooden yokes. Chimneys cough out the first smoke of the day. You hear the bells of St. Paul's tolling softly, and you return home. Wherever. That is, you slip inside as quietly as you left. Perhaps you will sleep now. Perhaps you won't. Either way, the city will not ask. London does not care who walks its streets at night. It only demands that you pay attention to sound, to shadow, to the subtle rules of the dark. And tonight, you've learned something unspoken. That the city is never truly asleep. It only pretends to be so that you can go on pretending too. But as you lie down and close your eyes, one question remains. If the city never sleeps, who gets to decide when the day truly ends? You've begun to notice a pattern, not just in the way the streets clear and fill like a tide with each passing hour, but in how truth itself behaves differently after dark. In daylight, London is rigid. It obeys rules, commerce, religion, hierarchy. At night, those boundaries loosen and other priorities emerge. This is not just a story about people walking the city after hours. It's about what they become when they do. Because when the sun sets in 17th century London, secrecy becomes currency, and the ordinary becomes dangerous. The rules you don't read. There are no written laws that govern the night, or at least not ones you'd find nailed to a parish door. But you quickly understand the unspoken expectations. Walk close to the walls, not the middle of the street, unless you want to step in refuse or worse. Carry a lantern if you can afford. 1. If not, borrow someone's shadow. Follow the light of another. Avoid the bridges after midnight. The Thames is as much a grave as a river. Bodies turn up tangled in the reeds, their causes of death a mystery left uninvestigated. And if someone hisses your name from an alley, do not stop. The night has its own etiquette, one built not on morality, but on navigation, survival. These are rules everyone knows but no one teaches. The brokers of night, taverns and the trade of secrets, you slip inside the Queen's Head, just off Bread Street. It's late enough now that the respectable customers have gone. What remains are the irregulars. Actors from the Bankside theaters, French émigrés, Dutch traders avoiding taxes, and women in veils who aren't noble at all. At a far table, a man leans over a sheaf of parchment, murmuring in Latin. Beside him, a merchant takes notes in shorthand. They are writing political libels, illegal pamphlets that will be distributed before sunrise. These taverns are more than dens of drink. They're marketplaces of information. Here, currency takes many forms. A whispered accusation about a neighbor's religion, a stolen letter from a rival shopkeeper, a rumor about the king's new mistress, a forged license to preach. The coffee houses, new and fashionable, have their own energy. But in the taverns after curfew, the talk turns darker, riskier. The drink loosens tongues, and once a secret is shared, it can't be taken back. The midnight economy. You might think of London's economy as something that sleeps. Bankers behind, closed shutters, ledgers tucked safely under lock and key. But a second economy comes alive after midnight. It includes prostitutes, sometimes called nightbirds, many of whom operate near churches ironically seen as safer because of patrolling watchmen. Candle vendors, selling the cheapest tallow light by weight, perfect for brief and questionable activities. Body snatchers, or resurrectionists, who steal corpses from fresh graves to sell to physicians in secret anatomy lessons. Pawnbrokers open illegally through back doors, serving those who need to trade a coat or heirloom for the means to eat. Even those who bake bread before dawn rely on this network. Flower runners bringing sacks from the dockyards, water carriers filling casks in secret from private wells. London sleeps, but its needs do not. And someone always is there to profit. The illegal faiths after dark, worship becomes dangerous. The Church of England is restored but not uncontested. Roman Catholics gather in hidden chapels. Dissenters, Puritans, Baptists, Quakers meet in private homes. Their prayers are quiet, their rituals stripped down, their leaders always looking over their shoulders. You hear of one such gathering in a weaver's loft near Whitechapel. They meet not to plot treason, but to share psalms and bread. Still, if caught, the penalties are real: fines, imprisonment, branding. The city tolerates many sins at night, but not unlicensed worship. That is seen as a threat to order itself, what the watchmen don't see. The watch is meant to be the law, but everyone knows they're poorly paid, often old or infirm and rarely motivated. Many will look away if given a coin. Some are former criminals themselves. Others are simply afraid. There's an art to avoiding their attention. Keep your head down. Walk with purpose. If stopped, say you're returning from your master's house or delivering medicine. Invent a cousin, a job, an errand. The lie doesn't matter, only your tone does. And yet the watchmen are not useless. They know the sounds of crime, a shutter pried loose, the scrape of iron on brick, the scream that is real. Still, more often than not, they arrive after the deed is done, if they arrive at all. The anatomy theaters near Barber Surgeons Hall, a small building keeps light behind drawn curtains. Inside, a surgeon lifts a flap of human skin with an ivory-handled scalpel. Around him, a dozen men in cloaks lean forward, eyes gleaming. The subject is a young man. He is dead, likely a criminal, or perhaps a pauper. No one asks. In daylight, such displays are regulated, rare and performed with ceremony. But tonight's dissection is illegal, and yet these quiet surgeries serve a purpose. Physicians hungry for knowledge, midwives seeking better understanding, apothecaries learning the secrets of the spleen. What London won't teach by law, it teaches by shadow. Sleeping isn't always safe, you might think, amidst all this chaos, that those at home are at least safe in their beds. Not quite. House fires are the most common nighttime disaster. A single knocked-over candle, a pipe too close to linen, and entire neighborhoods can vanish. London's wooden buildings and thatched roofs are tinderboxes. Then there are thieves, who pry open ground-floor shutters with bone tools, and illness, which comes without warning. Night air is believed to carry disease. People hang herbs from their windows, sage, lavender, rue, to sweeten the breath of the city. You might be asleep, but London isn't, and it might be coming for you. A different kind of freedom still. Not everything about the night is danger. For many, it's the only time they can truly be themselves. Two lovers of the same sex, walking silently by the river, knowing their world will disapprove come sunrise. A washerwoman finally free from her master's orders, singing softly to herself as she mends clothes by firelight. A printer composing forbidden verses just because he can. The night is London's other face. Not always kind, but sometimes honest in ways the day refuses to be. Because in daylight, you must explain yourself. At night, you are simply there. And that is enough. Preparing for sunrise. Now, as the first hints of dawn edge the rooftops, the city begins to shed its night skin. The link boys go home. The watch returns to its posts. Taverns close their shutters. The night's misdeeds are swept into the gutters or buried in silence, but the evidence remains: an unfamiliar glove on a doorstep, a footprint in soft mud beneath a window, the lingering scent of wax, smoke, sweat. The story of the night is never fully erased. It simply becomes tomorrow's rumor. And as you climb the stairs to your rented room and lie back against a creaking mattress, you wonder, if so much happens in secret, how much of history was born in darkness? By now you know the streets better in darkness than in daylight. You know the scent of spent lantern oil, the uneven rhythm of hooves on cobblestone, the way whispers slide along alley walls like mist. You've seen the night act not as a void but as a canvas, one painted over each evening with a fresh portrait of the city's unseen lives. And yet, we've only traced its surface. Because the true nature of nighttime London lies not just in its criminals and candlemakers, but in its very structure, its design, fears, economies, and the quiet truth that the city may never have been meant to sleep at all. A city designed to burn. Let's begin here. London in the 1600s was flammable, by design narrow streets, overhanging jetties, homes made from timber, thatch, pitch, and lath, chimneys rarely cleaned, candles left near flammable hangings, cooking done over open flames, chamber pots hurled out onto the streets. The fire that would one day consume London in 1666 wasn't an accident. It was an inevitability. But before that catastrophe, people lived in constant awareness that night brought danger. The bells of St. Magnus the Martyr would toll at 9 p.m., curfew, from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. It was a literal reminder to extinguish your hearth before bed. Some did. Many didn't. Sleep wasn't just vulnerable. It was flammable. Night, then, was less a time of rest than one of risk calculation. When you closed your shutters, you weren't just shutting out the cold. You were gambling that nothing outside or inside would turn fatal before dawn. Night soil and the filth economy. Let's speak now of the night soil men, those unfortunate but essential laborers who removed human waste from cesspits under cover of darkness. London did not yet have a proper sewer system. Waste was disposed of in privies, pits or barrels beneath buildings. These would be full in weeks, overflowing in months. By law, removal had to be done at night, when the smell would offend fewer nostrils and the carts could travel the streets unblocked. The workers were called gong farmers in earlier centuries, but by the 17th century most simply called them nightmen. You might hear them outside your window between midnight and 4 a.m., groaning under the weight of wooden tubs filled with filth. The waste was carted to fields outside the city, Clerkenwell, Lambeth, Hackney, where it was sold to farmers as fertilizer. Thus, the city's bowels were both literal and commercial. If you lived above a cesspit, your sleep came with a soundtrack. Sloshing, scraping, coughing. The underclass keeping the upper classes sanitary. No one praised them, but without them the city would drown in its own waste. Sleep, a fragmented habit. If you imagine Londoners lying down at night for 8 hours of uninterrupted slumber, you're thinking too modernly. In truth, sleep was fragmented. Most people experienced first sleep, usually from around 9 p.m. to midnight or 1 a.m., then second sleep from 2 or 3 a.m. until sunrise. In between was a waking period, the watch, when people would stir, pray, read, tend to fires, even visit neighbors. Midwives noted that many babies were born during this interval. Letters from the period mention this time as a natural phase of the night. People were not anxious about being awake in the middle of the night. They expected it. Sleep wasn't something to conquer. It was a rhythm, aligned not to the clock, but to the length of the night itself, which varied with the seasons. So when you hear London's night described as still, remember, it wasn't still at all. It was pulsing in its own strange rhythm. Moonlight and mayhem. The criminal clocksome crimes had their hours. Footpads, thieves who operated on foot rather than horseback, preferred midnight to 2 a.m. They targeted individuals walking alone, especially on the edge of the city or near the Thames. Burglars waited until 3 or 4 a.m., when homeowners had returned to second sleep. Pickpockets rarely worked at night. It was too dark. But fences, the people who purchased stolen goods, were often busiest after taverns closed. Smugglers, especially those dealing in untaxed cloth, tobacco, or books, used the hours before sunrise to move contraband along narrow alleys toward. The city walls are down to waiting riverboats. Moonlight helped, but too much light made hiding harder. A cloudy night was perfect for crime but dangerous for travel. Everyone, criminal or not, became a mathematician of risk. Fear of the supernatural. Even the most practical Londoners carried superstitions into the night. It wasn't just thieves or fire they feared. It was ghosts, apparitions, specters, witches. The line between sleep and waking dreams was thin, and sleep paralysis, then called the old hag, was terrifying. People believed it was caused by demons or witches sitting on one's chest. Churchyards were especially feared after sunset. The presence of watchmen did little to comfort those who believed that the dead could stir at midnight. Tales spread of will-o'-the-wisps luring travelers into bogs, of strange knocks on the walls at night, of devils in the form of cats. The line between fear and reality was blurred. You might say these beliefs are irrational. But in a world without electricity, antibiotics, or street surveillance, the supernatural filled the vacuum of uncertainty, and that vacuum widened with every hour past dusk. The labor that begins before dawn. The bakers begin stirring at 3 a.m. By 4, the first ovens are lit using wood and coal carted in the day before. If your home sits above a bake shop, the scent of yeast and burning oak will reach you before you fully wake. Next, the brewers, also early risers. Ale must be ready by noon, and the mashing begins early. Fishermen offload the night's catch at Billingsgate, shouting prices to the servants of wealthy homes. Even the city's rag pickers, collecting scraps of cloth for resale, begin their rounds before the sun. London wakes not all at once, but in layers. A city where people exist in shifts, their lives barely overlapping, their presence felt in smells, noises, and the absence they leave behind. You might never see the face of the woman who sews buttons by lamplight at 2 a.m., or the boy who collects dead rats to sell to physicians, but they are part of your city and you are part of theirs, even if only in scent or echo. What the night builds. So what does it all amount to? A question worth asking. After all, if the night is merely a mirror for desperation, survival, and petty crime, why does it matter? Why linger here? Because from these invisible hours, empires of information, trade, and science were built. The playwright who composed his best lines by candlelight after the taverns closed. The midwife who saved a child because she'd learned something during a sleepless vigil. The apprentice who copied an entire anatomy text by hand during second sleep. London's nighttime wasn't a void. It was an engine, turning in silence, working, learning, suffering, surviving, always moving. And though few historical documents mention these people by name, their efforts shaped the city as much as any monarch or battle. A glimpse toward modern times. In time, gaslight would come. The streets would be illuminated. Policing would improve. The concept of working hours would standardize. Factories would run through the night. Sleep would become something you were expected to do efficiently, not intuitively. But in the 17th century, the night was freedom and fear intertwined. A Londoner then might envy our light bulbs and central heating, but perhaps they would pity us, too, for never truly knowing the stars over our heads, or the thrill of surviving until morning. And so the city sleeps, or pretends to. Eventually, even the busiest corners of London fall silent. Smoke thins, footsteps fade, the chill settles, and still someone is awake. They always are. A writer, a lover, a thief, a parent, a child. Someone making history you will never read in a book. Not because it didn't matter, but because it happened at night. 3 meals from the plow. What medieval peasants really ate it is just before dawn. There is no clock, no alarm, no quiet digital chime to wake you. But you know it's time. Because the rooster has crowed. The air is sharp in your nostrils, and your back already aches from yesterday's work. You wake not from rest, but from the familiar weight of obligation. You are a peasant in medieval England, perhaps in the year 1275. You do not think of it that way. There is no 1275 to you. There are simply seasons, saints' days, feast days, and harvests. And hunger. Always hunger. quiet or roaring. It is the drumbeat behind every day. You rise from your straw bedding, shake the fleas from your tunic, and walk toward a smoky hearth, where the first meal of the day, if there is one, awaits. This is a story about what you eat, or more often, what you do not. The myth of the empty bowl. Modern imaginations often picture the medieval peasant's table as entirely empty. But this isn't quite true. Your diet, though limited and repetitive, is not starvation, at least not during the good years. But it is fragile. A bad harvest, too much rain, or a failed mill can tip you from subsistence to starvation in weeks. In ordinary times, your meals are centered around one word: grain. Grain is life: oats, rye, barley, and, if you are lucky or live in the South, wheat. These are ground, coarsely or finely, to make bread, gruel, pottage, or ale. You eat grain not just with every meal. You eat it as the meal, and it begins usually with breakfast. First meal. A bowl of warm simplicity. You do not call it breakfast. That word won't be commonly used for centuries, but in function the morning meal matters. Most likely it is a pottage, a warm wet porridge made from oats or barley boiled in water. If your household was lucky, some cabbage, leeks, or wild herbs were added the night before. Sometimes it is left over from the previous day, reboiled. There is no sugar, of course. Sweetness is a rarity. If anything sweet is added, it might be a crushed apple from your small orchard or a hint of honey, though the latter is expensive and rarely wasted on the poor. This porridge is eaten from a shared pot. You dip your wooden spoon. You eat quickly, silently, with others crouched around the fire. You are grateful. This meal is not guaranteed. In winter, breakfast might not exist at all. You may work several hours before anything crosses your lips. The rhythm of hunger. Everything in your day revolves around work, and work is impossible without fuel. You labor in the fields from sunup to sundown. The manor's land must be plowed, sown, harvested. You owe days to the Lord, days to the church, and then, only then, can you tend your family's strip of land. If breakfast was thin, dinner, served at midday, is the main hope. Second meal. Pottage again, and maybe bread. Dinner is eaten in the field or quickly at home. It is pottage again, but this time it might be thicker, richer. If your household kept a pig, some scraps of salted pork may be added. On feast days or after slaughter, bones are boiled for flavor. Beans, peas, and lentils round out the pot if they're in season. You are not vegetarian by choice. Meat is rare. You eat what you can. Bread is more precious than meat. Made from barley, rye, or maslin, a mixture of grains, your bread is coarse and dark, often dense with chaff and bits of grit from the millstone. It damages your teeth, but it fills your belly. If you work for the manor directly, you may be fed by the Lord's cook, who prepares a communal meal for the serfs, usually a large cauldron of pottage and bread dipped into it. You eat quickly. You return to the field. There is little time to savor food. Food is not pleasure, it is fuel and often fear. The vegetable question. What of vegetables? Yes, you eat them when they are available. Leeks, onions, garlic, and cabbage grow in your garden. You call them worts. Carrots, when you can find them, are purple or white. Green beans, turnips, and parsnips help fill the pot. But preservation is difficult. Cabbage doesn't last long. Root vegetables can be stored in the ground or in cellars, but they soften and spoil. In summer, you eat well. In winter, you eat memory. Ale, the essential liquid, you drink ale. Water is rarely trusted, especially near human settlement. Ale is made from barley, boiled then fermented. It is low in alcohol and consumed by everyone, children included. You may brew it yourself or buy it from the alewife, usually a woman in the village who maintains a brewing setup in her cottage. Her thatched roof smells of malt and smoke. She sells ale in small wooden cups. There is no glass, no bottle. Ale is also a calorie source. Without it, many would not survive. Milk is for children or cheese-making. Wine is for the nobility. Cider is regional. But ale? Ale is the bloodstream of the village. Third meal, cold, small, and sometimes missing, evening brings supper. It is a lighter version of dinner. Pottage again if any remains. Bread if you saved it. Perhaps a bit of cheese from the week's milk if your cow produced enough. You eat quietly, quickly. The fire dims. You clean the bowl with a crust. There is no dessert. There is no after-dinner tea. There is only the next day's hunger to consider. The bread hierarchy. Bread itself speaks volumes. About status. The poor eat black bread, coarse, heavy, and uneven. Barley, rye, and oats make up most loaves. They are hard to chew and often harbor grit, which wears your teeth over the years. The moderately better off eat maslin bread, a mix of rye and wheat. Only the wealthy eat manchet, a fine white bread, made from pure wheat flour sieved multiple times. To dream of manchet bread is to imagine not chewing grit. Bread is more than food. It is class-made edible. The fast days that aren't fasting. The church prescribes fast days, up to 150 days a year, including Lent, Advent, and every Friday. But fast does not mean abstaining from food. It means avoiding meat, dairy, and rich dishes. So on fast days, you might eat fish, if your village is near a stream, or preserved herring, salted cod, or eel, common foods traded across medieval Europe. Peasants who can't afford fish often bend the rules, eating eggs or cheese quietly. The church sees all, but it also turns a blind eye, because it knows that the poor cannot afford to fast any more than they already do. Feasts, and the rare day of plenty, and then suddenly a feast day arrives. A marriage, a saint's day, a harvest celebration, a slaughter. For once the pot holds meat, perhaps mutton or pork. There may be fresh bread, even some sweetened pudding made with dried fruit, nuts, or honey. Ale flows more freely. Laughter bubbles up. Children stay awake past dark. You eat not just for survival, but for joy. You eat like someone who might, just might, feel full. It is rare, and therefore sacred. The food you eat as a medieval peasant is not entirely yours. Not the barley you planted, not the cow you milked, not even the hen you raised from a chick. In this second part of our story, we go deeper, not into your cooking pot, but into the hierarchy that governs it. You live in a world of land, and land means obligation. The village. As a living ledger, your village is not just a cluster of huts. It's a system. Land is divided into strips. Not large fields that belong to families, but long, narrow segments parceled out by tradition and necessity. Your family might hold 10 strips scattered across 3 fields, alongside your neighbors, your cousins, and the reeve, a sort of foreman or enforcer for the Lord. These strips are not yours. They belong to the manor. You are a tenant, unfree, in the eyes of the law, yet bound to the land. In return for your plot, you owe labor and rent. That labor, called week work, is performed on the Lord's domain, his personal fields. You sow his barley before you sow your own. You thresh his grain before yours is dry. You eat last. The manor's stores and the peasants hunger after harvest. The grain goes to the manorial barns. Great wooden structures full of dust and rat droppings lined with sacks of barley, oats, and rye. This is the Lord's grain. It will feed his household, his garrison, and his guests. A portion might be set aside for brewing, stored for seed, or paid out in small allowances to working peasants. If your own yield is poor and your family is desperate, you might ask the reeve or bailiff for a loan of grain. It is not free. You will pay it back, in grain or labor. And if you cannot, the debt accumulates like a growing shadow behind your door. The church and its 1/10 of everything you produce, everything, goes to the church. This tithe includes your grain, your eggs, your cheese, and even your honey if you keep bees. There is no way to opt out. It is a spiritual tax backed by both divine authority and, increasingly, secular force. The local priest does not come to your home with a sack. Instead, the village has a tithe barn, where contributions are gathered and stored. Inside the barn, your contribution becomes anonymous, just one more sack among dozens. And yet you know. You remember each hen, each cheese, each oat you handed over. Some years, the giving leaves you with too little. The priest shrugs. God will provide, he says, but not always through food. Lords, feudal dues, and harvest pressure. The village economy is filled with customary dues, and every one of them cuts into your table. Some are seasonal. In harvest season, you owe extra days to gather the Lord's grain before your own. In plowing time, you may need to lend your ox, if you even have one, to work the domain first. On feast days, you may be expected to provide boon meals, special food contributions, for the manor staff. Others are more arbitrary. If your father dies, the Harriet is due, a death tax paid in the form of your best animal or its value. If you marry off a daughter, the Lord may demand a fine. If you grind your grain, it must be done at the Lord's mill for a fee. And the miller, of course, takes his cut. The manor mill, where bread begins, grain is no good until it's ground. But you cannot simply crush it yourself with stones. In many villages, this is forbidden. The Lord's mill is the only legal grinder, and you must use it, even if it's far, even if it's slow. The miller, employed by the Lord, is universally distrusted. He weighs your grain, grinds it, and takes a portion called a multure as his fee, but how much does he take? Too much, most likely. The miller is seen as sly, manipulative, and greedy. He works alone in a building by the stream, where no one can check his scales or challenge his judgment. There are countless complaints, and yet no peasant can grind independently. If you are caught using a hand quern, those small household stones used by your grandparents, you can be fined or punished. Bread begins in politics, not in the oven. The seasonal clock of survival, your food supply is never static. It flows with the seasons, not in abundance but in narrow windows of possibility. Spring. You plant and pray. Stocks are low. Green vegetables begin to emerge, nettles, leeks, and radishes. This is the hunger gap, when last year's grain is gone, and this year's has not yet grown. Summer. If the weather is kind, peas and beans ripen. Milk is more plentiful. Foraging offers berries and herbs. Autumn, the crucial time. Grain is harvested, threshed, and stored. Apples and nuts are gathered. Animals are slaughtered if they cannot be overwintered. Winter. Preservation is everything. You eat salted meat, dried peas, old onions, and barley. If snow falls early, you burn furniture before you miss a meal. Each season offers and then withdraws. The cupboard is never stable. Preservation. Without refrigeration. With no refrigeration, every meal depends on timing and technique. Meat, when available, is salted, smoked, or dried. The process is imperfect. If too much moisture remains, spoilage sets in. If too much salt is used, the meat is almost inedible. Cheese offers a better chance. Milk sours quickly, but if curdled, drained, and pressed, it can last weeks. Hard cheeses last longer still. Grain stores best, but even it can rot if damp or be eaten by mice, rats, or insects. You inspect it often. You pray it survives. Nothing lasts. Everything is a borrowed taste from yesterday. Holidays and obligations of excess. Ironically, some of the best food in the year comes not from surplus, but from duty. On major feast days, the Lord might host a banquet for tenants, both as celebration and demonstration of power. You eat roasted meat, you drink better ale. You may even see pies, sweetened pottages, or dishes you've only heard about. But it is performative generosity. The meal is given to show who owns the field. You eat, but you do not feast. The taste is sharp with the knowledge that tomorrow, it is back to broth and barley. Women and the hidden labor of feeding food in the medieval village is shaped by women's hands. Your mother wakes before dawn to tend the fire. Your sister gathers herbs. Your wife kneads the dough, checks the boiling pot, and manages the fading stores. Men till fields. But women manage food economies, the small, persistent tasks of preservation, preparation, and planning. Even ale is often brewed by women. The alewife is a central figure, equal parts chemist, merchant, and gossip. She walks with ash on her apron and the scent of malt in her hair. Without her, the village thirsts. Famine. When the system cracks, there are bad years, and then there are famine years. In 1315, rain falls for months. Crops rot in the fields. The roads dissolve into mud. Grain prices triple. Cattle die in the muck. People eat bark, leaves, cats. In some corners of Europe, there are rumors of cannibalism. But even smaller crises, wet springs, poor autumns, rat infestations, can unravel the system. You live so close to the edge that a single misstep, a lost ox, a broken plow, a failed crop, means hunger. In those years, food becomes prayer, and your breath smells not of garlic or beer, but of fear. Conclusion of Section 2. So now you see, the food of a medieval peasant is more than mere sustenance. It is currency, tribute, tax, debt, and risk. Every bowl of pottage is stirred not just by your hands, but by the hands of lords, priests, seasons, and custom. You do not eat alone. Even in your silence, the system joins you at the table. But still, amid this bleak reality, something persists, a small, stubborn joy. In the next section, we will explore the rare flavors of celebration, the foraging forgotten by records, and the folk wisdom of kitchens without cookbooks. If the previous sections have left a taste of barley and hardship in your mouth, now we turn to something slightly richer, not in extravagance but in ingenuity. Because while medieval peasants did not eat lavishly, they did not eat mindlessly either. Every bite, every herb, every feast and fast was shaped by centuries of adaptation. What they lacked in abundance, they made up for in resourcefulness, ritual, and a deep-rooted knowledge of their world. So now we wander off the plowed field and into the forests, hedgerows, and fireside recipes that quietly sustained life. Beyond, the plow, the wild pantry, the cultivated field was only part of the food landscape. What could not be grown was gathered. A medieval peasant might not own the woods, but common rights often granted limited access to forage, graze pigs, or collect deadwood. From the wild you gathered nettles, boiled like spinach in spring, sloes, and elderberries, steeped in weak wine or made into syrups, hazelnuts and chestnuts, stored for winter or ground into meal, mushrooms, a dangerous gamble, passed down by word of mouth, rose hips and hawthorn berries, used for preserves or weak teas. These weren't delicacies, they were supplements, ways to stave off scurvy, to add flavor, or simply to stretch a thin stew another day. Children, often barefoot, learned early to identify edibles. One misstep, a yewberry, a spotted mushroom, and the cost was death. But with the right knowledge, the forest was a quiet kind of treasure. Ale, pottage, and the logic of boiling most meals were not built around solid food, but boiling pots. Bread was valuable, but time-consuming and taxed at the mill. Instead, pottage, a thick soup of grains and vegetables, was the real staple. It was always on the fire. Leftovers went in. Herbs were added. Meat, if you had any. Bones for flavor. It was eternal. You didn't cook it from scratch each day. You simply kept it going, refreshed by whatever scraps you had. A version of the modern one-pot meal, but without recipes. Just instincts and availability. Boiling had other advantages. It was fuel efficient. It killed off harmful microbes. It allowed tough grains or roots to become edible. You might eat it 3 times a day. Some called it perpetual stew. If you were lucky, it lived up to the name, ale. The drink of the poor water was not always safe. Wells could be fouled. Streams could carry waste. So many peasants drank ale. Not strong beer, but a weak, cloudy brew, low in alcohol, and rich in calories. It was made from barley and flavored with herbs like bog myrtle or horehound, not hops, which became common later. Women often brewed it at home. An alewife could even sell small batches to neighbors, hanging a broom outside the door as a signal. The taste? Earthy, inconsistent, sometimes sour, but it sustained the body. And, on occasion, the spirit. Feasts, the calendar of relief, though daily. Meals were humble. The year held moments of excess. Feast days, both religious and communal. Each village's calendar revolved around saints' days, holy festivals, and agricultural markers. On these days, rules relaxed. Fasting might be lifted. The Lord might host a gathering. The parish might pool resources for a celebration, and in those moments you might taste roasted meat, often pork or goose, ale that was strong and fresh, bread made with white flour, not coarse brown, spiced puddings if someone had cloves or pepper. Some feasts were tied to survival. Lammas, for instance, August 1st, celebrated the first loaves from the new wheat harvest. It was a moment of relief, of bread after months of barley and hunger. Even weddings or baptisms brought small feasts. The food might not be abundant, but the spirit was shared. It reminded you that hunger could pause, however briefly. Medicinal meals and kitchen cures food was also medicine. The line between cooking and healing was thin. With no formal apothecaries, women, especially elder women, became the keepers of folk medicine. A few remembered combinations passed down through generations: leek and garlic pottage, believed to clear the lungs; mead made with nettles, taken in spring for blood renewal; porridge with honey and elderflower, good for fevers; grated horseradish in ale, for coughs and cold humors. Food was used not just to nourish, but to balance the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, a theory of medicine that guided health for centuries. This wasn't superstition. It was the science of the kitchen in an age before labs. Children, aging, and the peasant body peasant children were weaned early, often around 1 year, and moved straight to the family pot. Their food was no different: barley, pottage, turnips, weak ale. Malnutrition was common. Many children died before age 5. The old, meanwhile, struggled to chew coarse bread and tough root vegetables. Tooth loss was rampant, but they were also the keepers of knowledge. Old women might no longer plow or carry wood, but they remembered when to tap a birch tree for sap or how to smoke a fish without ruining the flesh. Survival wasn't just about strength, it was about remembering what worked. Holidays of abstinence. When not to eat. The church didn't just regulate what you ate, it dictated when you didn't. Roughly 1/3 of the calendar year was designated for fasting or abstinence. No meat on Fridays. Lent, 40 days of lean meals. Advent, another season of restraint. You were not supposed to eat meat, dairy, or eggs during these periods, though enforcement varied. The well-off often bought dispensations. The poor simply ate what they had, which often coincided with the rules anyway. Fish was encouraged, but inland peasants rarely had access, so they got creative. Herring, dried and salted. Eels, fatty and available in streams. In extreme cases, beavers were claimed as fish due to their aquatic lifestyle. God, after all, didn't patrol the marshes. Kitchen tools. The bare bones of cooking your kitchen was not a separate room. It was a hearth, a fire at the center of life. With no chimney, the smoke clung to your skin, your clothes, your thatch. You cooked with a cauldron hung on a hook or tripod, a griddle for flatbreads or pancakes, wooden spoons, bowls, and trenchers, flat pieces of bread used as plates, occasionally a baking stone placed near the coals. Your tools were basic but effective. You knew how to tell the heat by color, not by thermometers. You knew when stew was ready by smell, not by timer. And if the fire went out, you begged an ember from a neighbor. Fire was life, and food was fire made edible. Tastes lost to time. There are tastes from the medieval peasant world that we cannot quite recreate. The bitterness of barley ale left unfiltered, the earthy sweetness of carrots long before orange varieties, the spice of mustard seeds crushed without oil, the salted funk of half-rancid cheese eaten out of necessity. They did not eat what we would recognize as delicious, but neither did they eat without thought. Their food was contextual, ritualistic, functional, and sometimes, when stars aligned and the harvest was kind, joyful. The clerk, the quill, and the quiet rebellion, a day in a medieval scriptorium. You are sitting in near total silence. Your fingers are stained with ink, your knees ache from hours spent on a hard bench, and the only sound in the room is the quiet scratching of dozens of quills on stretched animal skin. Welcome to the scriptorium. It's easy to imagine the Middle Ages as a time of dirt, warfare, and superstition. But behind the bloodied swords and stone castles, another kind of labor was unfolding. Quiet, meticulous, and deeply influential. The preservation of knowledge, one painstaking letter at a time. This is not a tale of daring knights or sweeping plagues. It is the story of the clerk, the humble, often anonymous worker of words. He didn't fight wars. He copied them, and while his life might seem dull, even boring, it was anything but meaningless. The setting, stone walls and cold light. The scriptorium was the writing room of a monastery, usually adjacent to the cloister and near the church. Light streamed in from high, narrow windows, more gray than golden. No heating, no cushions. Just rows of desks, shelves stacked with blank vellum, and long tables heavy with ink, knives, and quills. If the air felt reverent, that's because it was. Copying text was not just work, it was worship. To write was to participate in the divine. A single misspelled word in a sacred manuscript wasn't a typo, it was an offense, a clerical sin. So the silence was absolute. You would not speak unless to murmur, Deus tecum, God, be with you, as you passed another scribe. Who were the scribes? Not all monks were scribes. It was a skill, often learned young, and it required steady hands, good eyesight, and intense patience. Scribes were trained from boyhood in Latin grammar, penmanship, and memorization. Their education was both mental and physical. You had to learn how to hold the quill at just the right angle, how much pressure to apply, how to read the work of others and not inject your own opinions. You were not creating, you were preserving. Some scribes were monks, others were lay brothers. A few were even hired workers, professional scribes, though these were rare in the early Middle Ages. If you copied well and lived long enough, you might be promoted to scriptor, who oversaw the others. But most remained quiet hands, lost to time. Materials of the trade before the printing press. Every single book was written by hand. That meant materials mattered. Quill pens were made from goose, swan, or crow feathers. Cut, shaped, and hardened to hold ink without splattering. Ink was brewed from oak galls, parasitic growths on trees, iron salts, and wine or vinegar. The result was a dark, rich black that faded over centuries to brown. Vellum, not paper, was the standard. It came from calfskin, scraped and stretched until thin and smooth. The preparation was long and gruesome, removing hair, soaking in lime, and drying under tension. Rulers and styluses were used to line the page. You did not simply write freehand, you ruled each margin and guide line by hand. Books were not just written. They were constructed from animal to object. Each page took hours. Each manuscript took months or years. It was slow work, but it endured. The process of copying. A typical day began with prayer, followed by assigned passages. If a scriptorium had a lectern reader, one monk would read aloud while others copied. More often, scribes worked from exemplars, existing copies propped beside them. You would copy line by line, word by word. No improvisation, no deviation. If the exemplar was flawed, you copied the mistake. Errors were common. Spelling was not standardized. Latin itself was evolving. Some scribes left marginal notes, corrections, curses, or commentary, but this was frowned upon. Mistakes were scratched out with knives or painted over. In illuminated manuscripts, text came first, then decorations. A scribe might leave space for illustrations or initials, which were filled in later by artists. You didn't finish a book in a week. You finished a page, if you were lucky. The cost of a book, because of the labor involved, books were immensely valuable. One Bible could cost the equivalent of a small farm. Vellum alone was costly. A single Bible might use 200 calfskins. Then came the time, the ink, the pigments for illuminations, often imported or made from rare materials, and the binding. Monasteries guarded their libraries. Chains were common. Theft of a book was not just petty theft, it was a serious crime, and yet books moved. They were copied and recopied, translated, amended, and shared across Europe. The transmission of a text, say Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, wasn't just a matter of transportation, it was recreation. A human hand rebirthed it every time. And with each scribe, something changed, however slightly. A day in the life, imagine your day. You rise before dawn. Matins is prayed in the cold dark. You eat a thin breakfast, perhaps a piece of bread, a sip of watered wine. You walk into the scriptorium. The air smells of skin and ink. You pick up your knife and trim your quill. You test your ink's flow. Then you begin. In principio erat verbum. In the beginning was the word. You copy from a dusty exemplar. Your back begins to ache. You adjust your position on the wooden bench. Midday prayer arrives. Then a meal. Simple gruel, maybe some beans. Back to the bench. The light is fading, but candles are rare and reserved for winter. You finish a page. You place a small nota bene, a mark to return to. You stretch your fingers. You whisper a short prayer. You go to bed knowing tomorrow you will write the same page again. Because it's not about finishing. It's about preserving what matters. The quiet rebellion. While the scriptorium was a place of order, it was not without tension. Some scribes, bored or irritated, left marginalia, notes in the margins. Some were humorous. This parchment is hairy. Or frustrated. The ink is thin, the light is bad, my hand is cold. Some were self-referential. As the harbor is welcome to the sailor, so is the last line to the scribe. And occasionally you see rebellion. Let the reader beware. The previous page lies. These notes are rare, but they crack open the door to real voices, to human moments inside a system designed for discipline and silence. The scribe wasn't just a machine. He was tired. He was hungry. He had opinions, but he kept writing. The endurance of the written word today. You might hold in your hands a medieval manuscript, a psalter, a law code, a recipe book, and never know the name of the person who wrote it. But they were real. They sat in the cold. They cut their fingers on parchment. They spilled ink. They muttered prayers, and they preserved the knowledge of their world for ours. Their lives were quiet, but not meaningless. Because long after the kingdoms fell, after the fields turned to highways and the swords rusted, their words remained. Written in ink, on skin, by tired hands. In silence, you have returned to your bench. The wooden grain beneath your arms is familiar now, worn smooth by repetition. The quill is sharpened. The ink sits in its horn well, dark and still. Outside, the abbey garden is beginning to green with the seasons change. Inside, nothing has changed. You write the same lines, on the same parchment, with the same focus. But even in this monotony, the quiet hum of history presses against your fingers. In this section, we travel beyond the narrow scriptorium walls to explore the hidden power of the books being copied. Not their stories, but their survival. The scribe, often faceless and forgotten, was not just a passive hand. He was a gatekeeper of memory, a silent architect of continuity in a world where chaos always lurked just beyond the gate. Knowledge as power and risk. In medieval Europe, knowledge was rarely neutral. A book could teach you about theology, but also about land ownership, debt, astronomy, or medicine. It could preserve a kingdom's laws or an emperor's decrees. It could quite literally justify power, And that meant the act of copying was not always passive. When a scribe selected one version of a text over another, or even just introduced an error, he helped reshape the future understanding of that text. Even the simple act of choosing what to copy next was, in its way, political. The church knew this. So did kings, which is why certain monasteries, like Monte Cassino in Italy or the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland, became intellectual fortresses, guarded not by swords, but by silence. Your script might be plain, but your hands are preserving worldviews. The rise of the Carolingian minuscule. Let's pause here and consider your handwriting. If you were a scribe in the 9th century, chances are you'd be trained in a script called Carolingian minuscule. It was simple, elegant, and most importantly, legible. Charlemagne, emperor of the Franks and self-declared protector of Christian learning, wanted to standardize knowledge across his empire. That meant not just spreading books, but making sure they were readable across regions. Carolingian minuscule replaced a patchwork of hard-to-read scripts. Its smooth curves and clear letter forms made it easier to understand Latin, even as spoken. Latin fractured into early Romance languages. Your day job, then, is part of something larger. A push toward intellectual unity. A visual language that ties together a continent in a time before borders were drawn on maps. And though Charlemagne's empire crumbled, his script endured, later evolving into our modern lowercase alphabet. The way you write these letters, it echoes in every book printed today. The unexpected subjects of medieval manuscripts. Not all scriptorium work was religious. Of course, Bibles, psalters, and books of hours dominated production. But in many monastic centers, scribes also copied medical texts from the Greeks and Arabs, mathematical treatises, and geometry herbals, describing the uses of plants' bestiaries, blending natural science and allegory histories, both local and classical law, codes crucial for land disputes and governance. Some even copied pagan literature, Virgil, Cicero, Ovid, though always with a cautious eye and clerical justification. Why preserve these? Because understanding the world meant understanding the past. Because practical knowledge was useful. And because, as medieval thinkers believed, truth could be found in many forms, so long as it led one closer to God. You may not be a theologian, but if you're copying Pliny's natural history, your work could help a physician save a life or a noble justify a war. Even the dullest lists, like monastery inventories or crop yields, can tell future historians how people lived, ate, and worked. When the ink speaks hidden marginalias you write, the margins around your text remain empty, for now. But in other manuscripts, those blank spaces became playgrounds, scribbles, doodles, small rebellions. Medieval marginalia is a world unto itself, knights fighting snails, monkeys playing bagpipes, cats chasing mice through lines of sacred scripture, naked figures in bazaar, poses even complaints from scribes. This parchment is beastly. The sun is too hot. My hand is cramped. Some of these drawings were jokes. Others were symbolic. Some may have meant nothing more than, I was bored. But all of them remind us, the scribe was human. Behind the pious silence was a living person with a sore back, a sense of humor, and perhaps a longing to do anything else. What does it mean when a monk adds a doodle of a dragon next to a passage from the Gospel of John? Was it a warning, a joke, a metaphor, or just a moment of escape? The margins whisper what the lines cannot say. Monastic libraries, repositories of the world. Let's take a moment to consider where these manuscripts went once finished. The monastery. Library was not a public place. Books were stored on shelves or in chests, sometimes chained to desks to prevent theft. They were cataloged, lent, and sometimes copied again. Many never left, but others traveled. Monks took them to sister houses. Bishops borrowed them for study. Scholars hand-copied fragments during visits. Royal courts requested copies to legitimize their authority. Thus, books moved slowly, but steadily. Across mountains, through wars, past plagues. Libraries like Canterbury, Fleury, and Corby became intellectual lifelines across centuries. And when a monastery burned, or was looted by Vikings, its books were sometimes all that was saved. Imagine carrying a codex wrapped in cloth, fleeing in the night. Not a jewel, not a relic, just parchment, ink, and memory. Women in the margins, female scribes and readers. Although most scriptoria were male only, women participated in book culture more than we often assume. Nuns, especially in orders like the Benedictines, copied texts in female houses. The Abbey of Gandersheim, for instance, was a center of literary production led by women. Patronesses, such as the Anglo-Saxon Queen Emma of Normandy, commissioned religious texts. Female scribes occasionally signed their work, like the enigmatic Ende, a 10th century Spanish nun who illuminated the Beatus of Girona. Archaeological discoveries have even revealed lapis lazuli dust in the dental plaque of a medieval woman buried at a German convent. The pigment was rare and expensive, used only in illuminations, meaning she was likely a scribe or illuminator, silently painting images now forgotten. Their names are scarce, but their brushstrokes remain, errors that change the world. You, the scribe, are careful, but you are not perfect. Every so often, a mistake slips in. Maybe you skip a line. Maybe you write the same sentence twice. Maybe you misread a word, and in doing so, subtly alter its meaning. Most of these changes are caught, scratched out, or corrected in the margins, but not always in our fact. Entire theological arguments have arisen from minor transcription errors, entire legal disputes from the addition or omission of a single clause. Consider the donation of Constantine, a forged document that granted authority over the Western Roman Empire to the Pope. It was copied and recopied for centuries before being declared a forgery in the Renaissance. Yet for hundreds of years its power lay not in its truth but in its presence, because it had been copied, by hand, again and again. The pen may not have been mightier than the sword, but it was slower, more patient, and often more permanent. The rise of universities and the end of the scriptorium era by the 12th and 13th centuries, something changed. Universities were rising, in Paris, Bologna, Oxford. With them came new demands for books, especially textbooks on theology, law, and philosophy. Scriptoria couldn't keep up, so a new system developed, Pitia. This was a rental method. Books were divided into standard sections, or pieces, and hired out to students and copyists for short periods. This allowed multiple copies to be made quickly, by secular scribes, not monks. The scriptoria faded, but the culture of the copy remained. Even Gutenberg, when he printed his Bible in the 1450s, based its layout on scribal manuscripts, the two-column format, the line justification, the illuminated initials, often hand-painted on the printed page. The printing press ended the era of hand copying, but it relied on it to begin. Your work, the work of a monk at a cold desk with ink-stained fingers, laid the foundation for mass literacy. Without you, the press would have had nothing to print. You've spent your life beneath the hush of wooden rafters and candlelight, bent over parchment. The outside world is distant, more rumor than reality. You don't wield a sword or preach in the pulpit, and yet your work will outlast many kings. Still, even as you complete your final folio, time has a way of erasing even the deepest grooves, carved in quiet ink. In this final section, we consider the fate of manuscripts, the slow unraveling of parchment over the centuries, and the twilight of the scribal age. This is the story of what survives, what vanishes, and what we're still rediscovering, sometimes hidden beneath other words, waiting to be read again. The fragility of memory. What was lost? The moment your manuscript leaves the scriptorium, it begins its long decline. Parchment cracks, inks fade, pages rot in damp libraries, rats chew through leather bindings. Fire, war, and carelessness destroy what monks spent months, years crafting. It's estimated that over 90% of all ancient and medieval manuscripts are lost. Whole genres, authors, and histories have simply disappeared. We know of books that once existed only because other books mentioned them. Some authors are known only by name, others not even that. In some cases, a single manuscript has preserved an entire literary legacy. For example, much of Tacitus's Annals, a crucial source on Roman emperors, survives in just one 11th century copy. One slip, one flood, one war, and an entire corner of the past vanishes forever. That's the fragility you worked with. Not just ink and parchment, but human memory itself. Palimpsests, the past beneath the page. Sometimes, however, the past doesn't fully disappear. It hides. A palimpsest is a manuscript that has been scraped clean and reused. Parchment was expensive. If a book became obsolete or its text was no longer useful, it might be washed, scraped, and written over. But medieval ink often left traces, faint shadows, ghosts of letters. In some palimpsests, scholars using modern imaging techniques like ultraviolet light or multispectral photography have rediscovered lost works beneath later writing. One famous example is the Archimedes palimpsest, a 10th century copy of mathematical works by the ancient Greek thinker. It was overwritten with a Christian prayer book in the 13th century. For centuries, the underlying text was invisible, but modern technology has revealed it, including material not found in any other surviving manuscript. You may never have known what text lay beneath your own quill, but the page remembered. Even when we forget, ink remembers. A dying art by the 15th century, the world around the monastery was changing quickly. Cities were growing, universities flourished, merchants became powerful, and then, in the 1440s, Johannes Gutenberg introduced a revolutionary tool, the movable type printing press. Suddenly, books could be copied in weeks, not years. And not just Bibles or theology, but popular romances, legal documents, scientific observations, and printed indulgences. The printing press didn't immediately end hand copying, but it made it obsolete. The scriptorium fell silent. Monks still wrote, of course, but they no longer produced the bulk of Europe's books. The world moved faster than the careful scratch of a quill could match. By the 16th century, printed books outnumbered manuscript copies across much of Europe. Your careful letters, Carolingian minuscule or otherwise, became quaint, nostalgic. A relic of a slower age, the unseen scribe, you are never named in the manuscript. That was not the custom. Most scribes remained anonymous. Their role was humble, part of a devotional life, not a personal one. Even when you did sign your name, it was often hidden in a colophon, a brief inscription at the end of the book. These rarely survived copying. Lord, forgive this poor scribe, many would write. Or, I have finished. Thanks be to God. A few left more personal notes. While I wrote, I froze, and what I could not write by the beams of the sun, I finished by candlelight. Irish scribe, 11th century. The ink is thin, the parchment bad, the scribe is weary. Marginal note in a French monastic codex, even these laments fade. The manuscript becomes a printed book. The printed book becomes a scanned file. The scanned file becomes a database. Your hand disappears, but the words remain. And so do your errors, your flourishes, your quirks of spelling, tiny fingerprints of your presence, long after your name has turned to dust. Rediscovery in the digital age today, your work is being read again. Across the world, scholars are digitizing medieval manuscripts at astonishing rates. Institutions like the British Library, the Vatican, and universities across Europe are scanning, preserving, and translating codices long hidden in dusty vaults. Some of these books have not been opened in centuries. Digital technology allows readers around the world to examine pages once accessible only to elite scholars. Machine learning is even being used to decipher faded text or reconstruct fragmented palimpsests. And so the words you copied, by lamplight, in silence, are now read by schoolchildren in Mumbai, professors in Toronto, and hobbyists in Tokyo. 1,000 years after your quill dried, your script is flickering back to life. The quiet rebellion of preservation. You may not have seen your work as political, but in a way it was. You preserved stories when war tried to erase them. You copied pagan authors when doctrine might have banned them. You retained histories when regimes wanted to forget. You did not protest with banners or blood, but you refused. To let memory die, that too is rebellion. In an age that changed slowly, dangerously, unpredictably, you clung to the labor of ink. You believed, even if quietly, that words mattered, and so they did. The scribe's final hour, it's evening now in the scriptorium. The candles are lit. The wind moans faintly against the stained glass. You lean over your desk. The final page is before you. A prayer, a poem, a formula. It doesn't matter. You dip the quill. You write the final line. Your hand aches. Your eyes are tired. You sign your name, or perhaps you don't. You roll up the scroll or close the codex. You blow gently to dry the ink. You murmur a prayer, not out of duty, but habit. And you walk away. The manuscript stays. It will pass through centuries. Some leaves may tear. Some will be bound anew. Some will be burned. Some will be hidden in the walls of old churches. Some will lie silent in libraries no one visits anymore. And maybe one day someone will turn its pages again. Their fingers tracing your careful lines, wondering who you were, what you thought, what you hoped. And maybe they'll see you, not as a name, but as a presence. Still here, between the lines. The itch of empire, life as a Roman census taker, in a 14 CEite is the year 14 CE, and you are a censorialis exactor, an official assigned to the Roman census. You are not a soldier or a senator. You are not a gladiator or a hero whose name will echo in marble. Instead, your job is to count people, property, livestock, acres of farmland, slaves, and grain. You go from town to town with a stylus and a wax tablet, working in the shadow of Rome's greatest machine, its bureaucracy. And while the empire celebrates the death of Augustus, first among emperors, you are in the provinces, trying to calculate precisely how many people should be taxed and how much they can afford to pay. It sounds simple, but behind every number is a life. Behind every census is control. And behind every door you knock on there is suspicion, because in the Roman world, the act of counting was never just about counting. The origins of the census long before your time. In the days of the Roman Republic, the census was a sacred ritual. Every 5 years, 2 censors, powerful magistrates, oversaw a formal enrollment in the Campus Martius. Citizens of Rome would line up by tribe and century, give their name, the names of their family, their property, and swear an oath of truth. It wasn't merely administrative, it was spiritual. The census defined a person's place in society. It determined how much they paid in taxes, whether they could serve in the legions, and what role they could play in elections. Citizenship in Rome was not a birthright alone, it was documented. But now, under the early empire, the process has shifted. You are not in Rome. You are in the provinces. And the census is no longer an event. It is a mechanism, a tool for organizing. One of the most complex societies the world has ever seen. You do not wear a toga. You wear dust. The census in the provinces, your role takes you through towns that rarely see Roman officials. Gallic villages with thatched roofs, Iberian settlements still half pagan, and cities along the Nile that whisper in Greek. Each town, or district pagus, is responsible for providing an accounting of its population and property every 14 years. Your job is to verify the numbers. You arrive, inspect records, conduct interviews, and sometimes, when suspicion arises, you count the homes yourself. You walk house by house. You question local elders. You examine boundary stones on farmland, trying to distinguish what belongs to whom. Many lie. Some plead. Others simply don't know. You are not always welcome. The census, after all, leads to taxation. It leads to military levies. It leads to interference. Some resent being counted like cattle. In Galilee, less than a decade earlier, a man named Judas of Gamala had led a brief uprising against the census itself. He claimed that no Jew should be counted by a Roman, that to be tallied like property was to accept foreign rule. His rebellion was crushed. But the tension lingers, the tools of your trade, You carry a few essential tools. Wax tablets for recording data, erasable, reusable, and durable. Each household's entries are kept separate. Name, number of occupants, livestock, fields, debts, and sometimes lineage. A calamus stylus for carving into the wax. You also carry an inkwell and parchment scrolls for final drafts. The breviarium. Populi, a summary record of prior censuses in the area. These records help you track discrepancies. They also reveal changes. A farm once owned by Gaius now claimed by Lucius? You investigate. A translator, if you're lucky. The provinces are not Latin-speaking by default. In parts of Syria, Africa, or Egypt, local dialects dominate. Communication is slow and imprecise. You stay in modest inns or among local officials. You eat bread, lentils, dried figs. You learn to distrust town scribes who offer help. They often doctor records to protect favored citizens. You are not a beloved figure. You are a walking ledger. The counting of people. When you count people, you ask for more than names. You ask for the dominus, head of the household, usually male, usually older. Number of dependents, wives, sons, daughters, slaves, freedmen. Occupations, farmer, smith, merchant, beggar, citizenship status, Roman, Latin, provincial, freedman, slave. The distinctions matter. Roman citizens pay different taxes. They have different rights. Their children can inherit wealth, own land, and serve in the legions. Non-citizens, especially in the outer provinces, often do not understand the layers of legal identity Rome has built. You do. You've studied the leges, the laws. You know that one man's claim of citizenship must be verified by documents, not merely confidence. There are, of course, people who live entirely outside the system. Nomads, brigands, refugees. You cannot count them. Rome does not yet know how to measure the unmeasurable. But someday, they will try. The counting of land and wealth next, you count. The Roman Empire was sustained not just by legions, but by land ownership. Agricultural productivity was the heart of Roman wealth, and taxation. Each plot of land must be described, its boundaries, crops, irrigation, and yield. You check for vineyards, taxable for wine production, olive groves, essential for oil, also taxable. Grain fields, crucial for supplying cities and the army. Pasture land, for livestock, especially taxable in terms of headcount. You are trained to estimate yields. If a family reports low harvests but you see overflowing grain jars or healthy cattle, you mark them for reassessment. Tax evasion is common, penalties harsh. There are patroni, wealthy locals who try to shield others. There are publicani, private, tax collectors with their own methods, sometimes more violent than legal. You keep your distance from both when you can. Under Augustus, an empire defined by numbers, all of this, the recording, the calculation, the reassessment, serves a singular goal: imperial control. Augustus, recently deceased, had revolutionized the empire's bureaucracy. Under his reforms, censuses expanded into all imperial provinces. Taxation became more standardized. The army became a professional force, tied to recruitment records and citizen rolls. Public works were planned using demographic data, roads, aqueducts, grain distribution. In short, Rome began to govern by spreadsheet. If not in form, then in principle. Your work, mundane as it feels, is what made imperial Rome possible. Without numbers, there is no structure. Without records, there is no empire. Lonely do you work alone. The census is not glamorous. It is not even respected. You are not invited to feasts. You are treated warily. You sometimes sleep in barns. In Egypt, where census data is surprisingly well preserved today due to the dry climate, papyri show the immense detail expected from you. Entire families would be listed down to infants. Errors were punished. Omissions were fined. Falsified reports could lead to arrest. You feel the weight of that responsibility. One wrong entry, and a family might be overtaxed, or underprotected. You are a bureaucrat, but you are also a judge, a detective, a reluctant anthropologist, and in rare moments you see beauty. You see how people live. You see children learning to write in Greek or Latin. You see women bartering. In the marketplace, you see gods painted on house walls, some Roman, some older. You see a world of voices Rome has not yet silenced. You try to count them all. A knock on the next door. You leave your current village. You head toward the next. A man on the road tells you it's not worth visiting. The last census team was turned away by the elders. He says they don't trust Rome. They say the census is a trick. You nod. You've heard it before. But still you'll go, because the empire expects your ledger to be full, because this is how Rome holds its vast body together, not by gold or glory, but by measuring the bones. You walk into the wind, wax tablet under your arm, stylus in hand, and behind you, Rome waits to count what you bring back. The village ahead is quiet, sun-bleached and dry. Olive trees cast brief shadows along its narrow paths. A few goats bleat, and somewhere behind a mud wall a woman sings a hymn you don't recognize. There's no welcoming party, no banners, no local dignitary to greet you. You are expected, but not wanted. You are here for the census. And they know what that means. A closed village, this small community, let's call it Vicus Duratinus, is technically under Roman jurisdiction. It pays tribute. It trades with nearby towns. But culturally, it is still Gallic. You are in what was once part of Gallia Narbonensis, where Rome has laid down stone roads, but has not yet cracked open hearts. The local magistrate, a balding man, with sharp eyes and an untrusting posture, meets you in the town's shaded atrium. A few scribes stand behind him, scrolls in hand, arms crossed. You show your tablet, stamped with the seal of the imperial office. He looks unimpressed. Yes, we submitted our declarations already, he says. Yes, you reply, but I need to verify them. There is silence. It's not a request. The fear of the census in places like Vicus Duratinus, the census is viewed not as a civic duty, but as an imposition. Local farmers have heard stories, true or not, of people losing land after a reassessment, of livestock being taken to meet quotas, of children conscripted into service. They fear Roman curiosity because it's never just curiosity. Your presence reminds them of imperial reach, that Rome watches even here, where the hills still whisper in the tongue of druids. Some families exaggerate their poverty, others leave out slaves from their rosters. A few falsely claim Roman citizenship to try to avoid local taxes and gain privileges. You've seen this before. Verifying the unverifiable, you sit with the town scribes. They hand you rolls of papyrus and parchment with names, fields, and asset lists. You find discrepancies immediately. 2 households listed as owning the same olive grove, a field supposedly uncultivated despite fresh wheat visible just beyond. The hill. A slave population reduced by half from the last census despite no record of manumission or death. You point these out gently. You are not a soldier. You have no lictors. You don't command violence. But you represent Rome, and Rome speaks with paperwork and penalties. The scribes shift uncomfortably. They blame clerical confusion. You ask to speak directly with the households. The scribes resist. You insist, and then begins the slow, grinding process of door-to-door truth-seeking. Inside the homes of empire. The homes in Vicus Duratinus are simple. Clay walls, thatched roofs, low doorways. Inside, the air is dark and cool. Most families sleep on straw mats. Cooking pots sit over low fire pits. The walls are adorned with local charms, symbols of gods older than Jupiter. You knock, step in, and ask questions. A widow named Tullia insists she owns only 1 ox. You ask where the second ox in her neighbor's stall came from. She blushes and says it is on loan. A farmer named Hermax says he owns 5 jugera of barley land. You show him a boundary stone from a previous survey suggesting he owns 10. He shrugs and offers wine. You decline. A young boy, perhaps 7, speaks Latin fluently. Unusual. You ask if he's ever been to Rome. His father answers quickly, He's never left the village. But the boy slips later and mentions a Roman tutor who lived with them for 2 years. You make a note. That may change their tax tier. The process is wearying. And always there is the underlying sense that you are not trusted, not because you are dishonest, but because you are foreign, because you count. Resistance. Without rebellion, unlike Judea or Germania, the resistance here is quiet. It is passive, bureaucratic rather than violent. Villages delay submissions, they lose documents, they swap names on lists. Elders forget how many sons they have. Scribes cite floods that washed away storage rooms. And then there is bribery. You are offered coin, wine, even a meal with a magistrate's daughter if you will correct a record. You refuse, not out of righteousness, but because everything you write must be reviewed by your regional legate. Mistakes cost you as well. You sleep uneasily. Someone scratches at your door in the night, not to hurt you, but to whisper, "Don't." Trust the grain counts, the numbers are false. You open the door. No one is there. How Rome handles data. The census data you gather travels in stages. First, it's recorded on wax tablets. Then, it's copied onto papyrus in a fair hand. Local copies stay in town archives. Regional officials gather bundles of data and send them by courier to provincial governors. The governors compile reports and send summaries to Rome. By the time your notes reach the capital, they have passed through 5 hands. But every layer builds the machine. Your records feed tax rolls. Tax rolls fund legions. Legions defend borders. Borders define Rome. You are one node in a system that stretches from Britannia to the Euphrates, and yet, no one sees you. The cost of miscounting, it's not just about money. Inaccurate data can mean undersupplied military garrisons, food shortages in cities expecting more grain, riots in ports when taxes rise unpredictably, governors being recalled or executed for perceived failures. In 6 CE, when Quirinius conducted the census in Judea, it sparked such resistance that decades later the memory of it would still fester. That census, poorly timed and poorly explained, was seen as an existential threat. It's a reminder, counting people can feel like counting. Control, so you are cautious, thorough. But no matter how hard you try, you know some of what you record is false. Some will slip through, some must. The system tolerates this. Rome doesn't require perfect knowledge. It requires enough knowledge to dominate. An unexpected confession. One afternoon, a young man named Gaius finds you. He's from a nearby village, not part of your current route, but he heard of your arrival. He asks if he can be counted. You pause. You're not on my list. I was left out last time, he says. My father said it would protect me, but I want to serve. I want to be a legionary. He is of age. He speaks Latin well. You inspect his clothing, clean, if humble. You ask for proof of lineage. He hands you a faded scroll signed by a previous magistrate. It's enough, you mark him down. Name, age, origin, assets, none. He is poor, but he wants in. Why? You ask. I don't want to be invisible, the border of memory. The census is not just about the present, it shapes the historical record. Thanks to Egypt's climate, thousands of census documents survive there today. From dusty scrolls we can see entire households, names, relationships, odd notes in the margins. We see brothers recorded as sharing a house, widows living with daughters. We even see disputes scrawled in haste. This man is lying, the ox is mine. You don't know it, but centuries from now, your wax tablet may end up in an archive, or in a museum, or burned. But for now it builds the skeleton of the empire. Without it, Rome would forget who it ruled. A letter to the governor at the end of your second week in Vicus Duratinus. You send a letter. It reads, to the Prefectus Censusum. The census in this district is complete. Records attached. Several discrepancies noted. See items IV and 7th. One new applicant for enrollment. See Gaius, son of Varenus. Minor resistance encountered. No violent incidents. Local scribes partially cooperative. Request advice on land reassessment in Region 3. Boundaries unclear. In service, Lucius Calventius, provincial exactor. You seal it with wax and hand it to a courier. Another village awaits. Another set of invisible people to bring into the light. The numbers are in. Scrolls tied. Seals pressed. Reports sent. You step back, brush dust from your tunic, and breathe in the dry, quiet air of the Roman provinces. Your census tour is complete for now. There are no banners to mark your return, no crowd to applaud your diligence, and certainly no statue to immortalize your ink-stained hands. But your work matters. It has always mattered, even if it's boring. Especially because it's boring. The hidden gears of empire. Rome thrives not just on conquest, but on counting. The emperors, Augustus, now Tiberius, may win loyalty with bread and spectacle, but beneath that theater lies a bureaucratic machine so vast, so precise, that it rivals any army in its power. Census takers like you are the mechanics of this machine. You don't brandish swords. You carry styluses, but your work fuels everything. The legions depend on population counts to know how many soldiers they can draw. Governors rely on crop and livestock assessments to plan for provisioning. Taxes, tributes, and exemptions all stem from your data. Without you, the empire doesn't stop, but it limps, it guesses, and Rome cannot afford to guess. Augustus, in the obsession with order, it was Augustus, Octavian, the first true emperor, who made the census sacred again. After the civil wars, after the chaos of Caesar's murder and Mark Antony's rebellion, Augustus restored order. That was his brand. His empire was one of method and hierarchy. He wanted to know exactly what Rome had, what Rome lacked, and what Rome could expect. He institutionalized the census into a regular, scheduled rhythm. Every 5 years, every citizen. In 14 CE, the year you complete your task, Augustus dies. You do not know it yet, but your census may be one of the last reviewed with his own eyes. Your ink, your numbers, they pass through the final ring of Augustus's imperial awareness. Imagine that. Your scratchy notes, your survey of a Gallic village, maybe even your report on Gaius, the boy who wanted to be seen, possibly read in Rome, in the last breath of an emperor's attention. The trouble with truth, your work is never exact. You know this. You double-counted livestock in one village because 2 brothers refused to share a field, and both claimed it. You omitted a tiny hamlet because the roads were washed out and your translator fell ill. You wrote down 3 children when a nervous father said 4, but one child looked barely alive and you didn't push. You tried. But the census is as much about politics and pressure as it is about truth. You've learned how people lie, not only to cheat but to protect. How a slave might call himself a servant in hopes of freedom. How a widow might inflate her grain storage so the town won't pity her. How a town elder might change the names of the dead just to prove that he still has sons. Rome wants truth, but often it gets usefulness instead. Census and social control. You think back on the hundreds of names you recorded. Most of them will never matter to the state. A farmer with a few acres. A goat herd with 1 wife and 3 children. A potter. A mule driver. A fisherman. But they matter in another way. Because to be counted is to be seen. And once seen, you are categorized, labeled, assigned status, obligated. The census defines not only wealth, but identity. Citizens are counted, differently than non-citizens. Women's roles are tied to their husbands or fathers. Freedmen are registered under their former masters' names. Slaves are property, not people, but still, their numbers affect a household's standing. Rome's census doesn't just tally heads. It locks society into shape. This is power. Consequences of the count you hear of fall out from your census work months later. In Vicus Duratinus, 2 magistrates are removed after your discrepancies expose tax fraud, a field you flagged for boundary. Confusion is reassigned, prompting a lawsuit between cousins. Gaius, the eager young man, is recruited into the legions and stationed in Pannonia. His dream realized, his family proud. But there is also resentment. Villages complain about increased Grain levies. Small rebellion breaks out 2 provinces away, partly blamed on new census data triggering conscriptions. Scribes in one town falsify records in retaliation, and a future census taker is found beaten and tied to a tree. You were lucky, you realize. Boring in your case was safe. Echoes in history centuries from now. A fragment of your work will be found. Not yours specifically. Your tablets, your scrolls, your personal notes likely won't survive. But others like you, tireless, anonymous scribes, leave behind traces. Papyri found in Egypt will show census rolls naming entire families, including children, their ages, and their occupations. Historians will marvel at the thoroughness. They will say, Rome was obsessed with order. They will not mention your sore feet, your sleepless nights, your arguments with reluctant farmers. They will not see your ink-stained fingernails, or the way you once rewrote a list 10 times because a scribe smudged the wax. They will see only the results, and that is both the tragedy and the triumph of bureaucratic work. The legacy of the boring. The Roman census influences countless civilizations after its fall. The Domesday Book of England owes its method to Roman templates. Napoleonic Europe revives regular citizen tallies. Modern national ID systems, tax assessments, and voter rolls all echo ancient techniques of enumeration. What you did, what seemed tedious, unremarkable, and buried in parchment, is the framework by which societies decide who matters, and yet your name will be forgotten, not out of malice, but because you served something larger than recognition. You served structure. Return to Rome. Eventually, you return to the city. You walk the stone-paved Via Aurelia, past aqueducts and cemeteries, the walls of Rome looming in the haze. The Forum buzzes with life. Senators debate. Merchants yell. Priests burn offerings. You make your final report. Your superior listens, nods, and says, "Well done." He does not ask about the boy Gaius. He does not inquire about the sleepless nights or the strange symbols on Gallic walls. He simply files your data, then turns to the next stack of parchment.